The Rise of Kyoshi by FCE, featuring Michael Dante DiMartino. The Town. The Taihua Mountains south of Ba Sing Se were treacherous beyond measure. They were said to have swallowed armies in the days of the city's founding. Howling blizzards could freeze a traveller's feet to the ground, snapping them off at the ankles. Once every decade or so, the winds would shift, carrying red dust from Si Wong to the peaks of Taihua, polluting the snow a fearsome bloody colour, turning the mountains into daggers plunged through the heart of the world. Peng Peng sailed over the dangerous terrain unbothered. From their vantage point, Kyoshi and the others could see any weather sneaking up on them, and right now it was clear in every direction. "This is the life," Lex said. He rolled over onto his side, reaching over the saddle and patted her fur. "That's a good girl. Who's a good girl?" He'd been trying to get the bison to like him more than Kyoshi and Rangi at every available opportunity. Kyoshi didn't mind so much. It meant Lex took care of foraging and watering for Peng Peng, like she had her own stable hand. "Oh, I'm glad you remembered to come back for me," Lao Gi said. "There's no way I could have made it here on my own." The old man yawned and stretched, catching as much of the breeze between his arms as he could. "I have to remember not to wander off by myself for too long." His comment made Kyoshi's stomach constrict. The journal said that Lao Gi came back from his jaunts with blood on his hands. She wondered if her mother had sat this close to him as they travelled, afraid that she might be one of his victims in the future. "We're way past the last charted outposts," Rangi said from the driver's seat. "Beyond that, the mountains haven't been mapped." "Yeah, an outlaw town isn't going to be on a map," Kirima said. "This is the exact flight path we used to take with Jessa. Keep going." As they flew toward a line of jutting grey peaks, the mountains separated, gaining depth. The formation was less a ridge and more of a ring that obscured a crater from all sides. The depression held a small, shallow lake that Kyoshi thought was brown and polluted at first. But as they flew closer, she saw the water was as clear and pure as could be. She'd been looking straight through the lake to the dirt bottom. Next to the lake, built into the slope like a rice terrace, was an encampment slightly more handsome than the slums of Chameleon Bay. Long houses had been constructed out of mountain lumber hauled from the forest down below. Several of them sat on makeshift piles, fighting a losing battle against erosion. Glinting with openly carried weapons, people filed in between the gaps along the streets. "Welcome to Hujiang," Kirima said, one of the few remaining places in the world where followers of the code gather freely. "Is everyone down there at Daofei?" Kyoshi said. "Yes," Wong said. He frowned at the crowds below, though it seems more busy than usual. They'd approached with the sun behind them out of caution. Lek pointed Rangi toward a cave farther away where Kyoshi's mother used to hide Long Yan. They landed Peng Peng there, camouflaged her with fallen branches and shrubs, and suffered the lengthy hike to town. The long-time members of the Flying Opera Company were prepared for the fine silt that rose from the winding, narrow path stirred by their footsteps. They pulled close-woven neckerchiefs over their noses and mouths and smirked underneath when Kyoshi and Rangi looked askance at them with reddened eyes. The group was still figuring out what courtesies to share. Apparently, spare dust masks fell by the wayside. Around in the mountain, they entered Hujiang from above, carefully picking their way down crudely carved steps that were oversized to cut down on the number of needed. Kyoshi wondered why they weren't earthbent into shape. They came to one of the large streets and lowered their scarves. "Should probably keep your head down this time," Rangi said to Kyoshi, "instead of barging in like you owned the place." The debacle in Chameleon Bay still weighed on her mind. "No," Kirima hissed. "You act meek in this town and everyone will think you're weak. Follow our lead." As they joined the flow of traffic, the waterbender seemed to grow in stature, expanding her presence. Kirima normally retained a certain amount of elegance to her movements, but now she stepped through the crowd with exaggerated purpose and delicacy. She gazed through lidded eyes down the length of her chin as she walked, a picture of sophistication, a swordswoman moving through a form with a live blade. Interrupting her flow would mean getting cut to shreds. "Gotta look like you're ready to take someone's head off at any moment, for any reason," Wong said, "or else you'll get challenged." He followed Kirima with angry stomps, abandoning the agility Kyoshi knew he possessed. His feet sent seismic thuds through the ground. "Top-nut's got it," Lex said, pointing at Rangi. "Look at her, boiling away with firebender rage. See if you can pull that off." "I'm not doing anything," Rangi protested. "This is my normal face." "Could also try to be like me," Lao Gi said. He hunched inside his threadbare clothes, hiding his muscles, and flashed his manic, gap-toothed smile. He looked like the group's shameful grandfather who'd escaped from the attic. Picking a fight with you would be a disgrace, Lex said. Exactly. They made their way toward the bazaar in the center of town. It was slow going, trying to look tough. And not just for them. The other outlaws swaggered along the avenues, chests thrust out, elbows wide. A few favored crewmen approached with razor-edged refinement, carrying now jans instead of broadswords to complete the image. Practically everyone was armed to the teeth. Most with swords and spears, but more exotic weapons like three-section staves, deer-horn blades, and meteor hammers were surprisingly common as well. Kyoshi spotted a few people wielding arms that should have been flat-out impossible to fight with. One man had a basket with knives lining the edge of a tether trailing off it. It's like I'm carrying a muck rake, Rangi whispered, tilting her head at a pug-nosed man waddling by. That's Moonsei Xingzhu, and don't stare at the rake, Lex said. I've seen him punch the skulls of 2 men at once with it. The Flying Opera Company had by far the least amount of metal on their persons. Most of these people don't seem like benders, Kyoshi said. What, are you looking to trade us in for better teachers? Kirima said. Because you're right, they're not benders. Most outlaws live and die by the weapons in their hands. Our crew was a rarity. Honestly, I think you should appreciate us more, Wong said. Kyoshi was distracted by a clatter of metal to the side. 2 men, both carrying swords, had bumped into each other as they rounded a corner in opposite directions. The street slowed around them. Kyoshi's stomach churned as she anticipated a surge of violence, gore running through the gutters. It never came. Blades stayed in their scabbards while the men apologized profusely to each other, acting as friendly as 2 merchants who were planning a marriage between their children. There were promises to buy cups of tea and wine for each other before they parted ways. The happy smiles stayed on their faces long after the encounter. They'll meet on the challenge platform tonight, Lex said, probably during the weapons portion of the evening. He made a bloody, strangled noise that made it obvious what the outcome would be. What? Kyoshi said. That wasn't a big deal. You don't understand, he said. In this world, the only currency you have is your name and your willingness to defend it. If either of those men showed fear or poor self-control, they'd never get taken on by an outfit again. They had no other options. They could stop being Dao Fei, Rangi muttered. Like it's so easy to do whatever you want. Lex's face was full of bitterness. You think honest work rains down from the sky? This is why the 2 of you are the worst. No one takes up this life on purpose. Lek, Kirima warned. His shouting had drawn attention. Eyes watched them from the windows and porches of houses, anticipating a second act to tonight's performance. Lek calmed down. Keep walking, he said to Rangi and Kyoshi. Show them we're together and it'll be fine. Kyoshi had no objection to following his lead this time. She controlled her posture with renewed seriousness. They resumed picking their way through the town. There's an expression in these parts, Wong said, his low grumble giving the argument a close. When the law gives you nothing to eat, you turn to the code. Then at least you can feast on your pride. The Hujiang Bazaar was a bazaar, not much different from the one in Qinchao village, which neighbored Yokoya. Vendors sat cross-legged next to piles of their wares on tarps laid over the ground, scowling at passers-by who kicked up too much dust or lingered without buying. The sounds of haggling rang out in the air. Here it was safe to let loose with aggression. There seemed to be a distinction between the warriors and the black marketeers who supplied them. Kyoshi noticed that most of the peddlers specialized in traveling food, dried and smoked meats, beans and lentils. Rice was expensive, produce more so. The fresh vegetables were brown and wilted, and the rare pieces of shriveled fruit looked like decorative antiques. How did this stuff travel up here? She asked. For that matter, how did the people? There are unmarked passageways through the mountains, Kirima said. More trade secrets. The royal surveyors in Ba Sing Se don't have a clue. That must have been a big part of why the Dao Fei was so hard to stamp out for good. Kyoshi reflected on what Jiang Shu had told her about the Earth Kingdom being too big to police. If underground networks like this one could thrive so near the capital, then the rot must be worse throughout the far reaches of the continent. A whole other community existed below the surface of the Earth Kingdom. The moniker of the Fifth Nation pirate fleet suddenly took on a defiant meaning. We're here, Kyoshi imagined their formidable leader saying with an ice-blue stare. We've always been here. Ignore us at your peril. Wong's foot caught on a brass oil lamp. The vendor it belonged to cursed before looking upward and silencing himself willingly. With his size, the flitting sparrowkeet didn't need name recognition. First glances were enough. It's crowded, Wong repeated. He'd been fixated on that since they arrived. Kurima and Lek took his complaint seriously. They lifted their heads higher, scanning the bazaar. Kyoshi tried to help, but she had no idea what to look for. East by northeast, Rangi said. They're listening to someone speak. Sure enough, the people gathered in that corner of the bazaar had their backs turned, showing dao, broadswords, or other weapons strapped to their torsos. They nodded intently, absorbing whatever message was being preached to them. Someone found the leader a stool or a crate because he stepped upward to reveal an ugly face bisected by a leather strap. Lek and Kurima both swore loudly. We've got to get out of here, Lek said. Now. What's the problem? Rangi said. The problem is we shouldn't have come here, Kurima said. We've got to leave town, as fast as possible. Don't make eye contact, Lek said as Kyoshi tried to get one last glance at the man. The strap looked like it was holding his nose in place. His speech had reached a fever pitch, his jaw working up and down like he had a chunk of meat between them. Strangely, he had a moon peach blossom tucked into his collar. She didn't have time to see any more details. They hustled back the way they came, only to run into someone in their exact same spot as the earlier encounter they'd witnessed. That blind spot was a death trap. Lek's face fell in despair. He backed up a few steps and bowed sharply using the same fist-over-hand salute from when he'd greeted Kyoshi for the first time. So did Kurima and Wong. Uncle Mock, they said in chorus, keeping their heads lowered. The man they waited on for a response was dressed in plain merchant's robes. His spotlessness stood out in the dusty filth of the town. He was strikingly handsome, with narrow eyes resting over fine cheekbones. And there was a moon peach blossom tucked into his lapel. He couldn't have been older than Kurima. Kyoshi didn't understand why they were calling him Uncle. Bullet Lek, Uncle Mock said. And friends. You made the long journey from Chameleon Bay. It had been too long since we felt the embrace of our brethren, Lek said, trembling. In the short time she'd known him, Kyoshi had never heard the boy speak with such deference or fear. And you brought extra bodies? Mock eyed the two new members of the group. Rangi had already matched the bows of the others, calculating that sometimes it was better to keep quiet and play along. Kyoshi tried to do the same, but not without Mock catching her using the wrong hands at first. Fresh fish, Kurima explained, raising her head only slightly. He was still beating respect and tradition into them. Kyoshi, Rangi, this is our elder, Mock the accountant. There was no mention of an elder Mock in the journal. As far as Kyoshi knew, her parents were the elders of the group. See that you do, Mock said with what he deemed a warm smile. Without our codes, we are nothing but animals begging for fences. It's fortuitous that you're here, for I have business to discuss with you. How lucky we are, Wong said. If it rankled him, bound to a younger man, he kept it to himself. Kyoshi noticed that Lao Gi had managed to disappear yet again. She wondered if it was solely so he didn't have to call Mock Uncle. Let's discuss it tonight, Mock said. Why don't you join me as my guests at the challenge platform? When there's this many people in town, blood runs high. Should be fun. It would be a distinguished honor, Uncle, Rangi said, beating the others to the punch. Our gratitude for the invitation. Mock beamed. Fire Nation. It's wonderful how respect comes so naturally to them. He reached out and knocked Lek's head wrap to the ground so he could tussle the boy's hair. I remember when I first met this one, he said as he fixed Kyoshi with his slitted gaze. His fingers gripped Lek's scalp, yanking and twisting his head around, making sure it hurt. He was such a mouthy little brat, but he learned how to act. Lek put up with the manhandling without a noise. Mock cast him to the side like an apple core. I hope you're an equally quick study, he said to Kyoshi, making a clicking noise with his teeth. After Mock left, no one spoke. They waited for Lek to pick up his hat off the ground and smooth his hair. His eyes were red from more than dust. Kyoshi had questions, but she was afraid of saying them out loud in the street. She knew exactly what kind of man the accountant was. Zhang Shu had once implemented a policy that any member of the staff, no matter how lowly, could talk to him personally about any household concern. Kyoshi saw the gesture of kindness devolve into some of the servants ratting each other out over minor grievances, hoping to curry favour. She knew now that had been his intent all along. The long-house-lined streets of Huangjiang felt like the walls of the mansion during the worst of the paranoia. She had no doubt that a careless word risked making it to Mock's ears. She followed her group to a termite-eaten inn that hadn't been painted since young Chen was alive. Many of the outlaws they passed along the way had moon peach blossoms in various states of freshness placed somewhere on their person. She couldn't believe how dumb she was to not have noticed before. They paid for a single room and tromped up the stairs, a funeral procession. Inside their lodgings, the bare planks of the floor had been oiled by the touch of human skin. There weren't enough beds if they were planning to sleep here tonight. This is one of the tighter-built houses, Karima said after she shut the door and slumped against a wall. It'll be safe to talk as long as you don't shout. Wong stuck his head out the window and did a full sweep of the street below, craning his head upward to check the roof. He pulled himself back in and latched the shutters closed. I suppose you want an explanation, he said. Those hard times we mentioned back in Chameleon Bay, Karima said. They were pretty hard. After your parents died, Jess's bison escaped and we never saw him again. Kyoshi understood that much. The link between air nomads and their flying companions was so strong that the animals would normally run away and rejoin wild herds if they lost their airbender. It was a complete miracle that Pen Pen had stuck around to help her. We were trapped in the wrong city with too many debts to the wrong people, Karima continued. Ignoring the irony, by most standards, they were the wrong people. We were desperate, so we escaped the Autumn Bloom Society as our elders in exchange for some favors and cash. The peach flower guys, Wong said. Moon peaches normally bloomed in spring, but then again, these were Dao Fei, not farmers. I take it this group is now beholden to the Autumn Bloom, Rangi said. Seemed like a safe move at the time, Karima said. After the Yellownecks scattered, there were so many small societies grubbing for the scraps. Mock and the Autumn Bloom started off as nothing special. They had begun to squeeze the other outfits. And by squeeze, we mean crush them to a pulp and suck on their bloodstains, Wong said. They were barely concerned with turning a profit, Karima said, shaking her head at the greatest outrage of all. The law hasn't caught wind of them yet because they've yet to make any big plays above ground. Well, I can guarantee you that's about to change, Rangi said. What we saw in the bazaar was a campaign muster, a recruitment drive. Mock has big plans ahead. And we're signed up now, Karima said. If we disobey a summons by our sworn elders, our name will be worth less than mud. We'll be worse off than when we met the Autumn Bloom. Plus, he'll, kill us, Wong said. Black thumped the back of his head against the wall. Mock owns us now, he said. He sounded like he was speaking through an empty gourd. Our independence was Jesser and Hark's pride, and we threw it away. Because of me. Lek, Karima said sharply. You were injured and would have died without treatment. We've been over this. Stung by a buzzard wasp, Lek said to Kyoshi and Rangi. He laughed with a bitterness that had to have been developed over many nights of reflection. Can you believe it? Like I was fated to be this group's downfall. Jesser and Hark would have made the same decision in a heartbeat, Karima said. Kyoshi's breath rushed in and out through her nose. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster, until her lungs felt like they'd escaped through the holes in her skull. She remembered scraping her head against the frozen ground when she was little, trying to seek relief for the fever blazing within her body. She remembered trying to walk again after untreated sickness sapped her muscles, not being certain if the shaking would ever go away. Was it possible to enter the Avatar state through sheer contempt? She stared at the Dao Fei, lost in their own histories. What did they know, huh? What did they know? They'd had each other, family willing to make sacrifices. She had no doubt that Jesser and Hark would have done anything from their gang. Just not their daughter. Sworn ties triumph blood ties. Wasn't that the lesson needed to be etched into her bones? Oh, boo-hoo! Kyoshi snapped. How pathetic of you. They turned their heads toward her. She refused to look at any one of them, instead staring at a blank spot in the wall where a knot had fallen out of the wood, leaving a dent in the plank. So your choices had consequences, Kyoshi said. It's not the definition of a raw deal, that's life. You made your bed with Mark's, and I made mine with yours. I should be the one complaining. She wished she had a spitting habit so she could add the appropriate colour to what she was saying. If he wants us to show up tonight, then we show up tonight. We do whatever he wants us to do. And then we all can get what we came here for. She ended her statement a hair's breadth from shouting. A long silence followed. Kyoshi's got a point, Karima said. The wall creaked as she took her shoulder off it. You have no choice but to take things one step at a time. She didn't have to be so mean, Wong muttered. After Kyoshi's outburst, Rangi asked the others for a moment alone with her. They filed out like sullen children. The room transformed from too small to too big. "Don't yell at me," Kyoshi said preemptively. "None of this autumn bloom nonsense was in the journal." "And yet here we are anyway," Rangi said. She seemed at a loss for what to say. She pointed in different directions to emphasize rants she hadn't made yet. Eventually, she settled for a question. "Do you know what it's like, watching you sink deeper into this muck?" "I'm doing what's necessary," Kyoshi said. "If you want me to make faster progress, then let's go find an isolated spot and practice more firebending." "Kyoshi, you're not listening to me." Rangi instinctively lowered her voice to protect their secret. "You're the Avatar." "I remember, Rangi." "Do you?" she said. "Do you really? Because the last time I checked, the Avatar is supposed to be shaping the world for the good of humans and spirits, not risking their neck to help a bunch of second-story thieves pay off their debts." She held back from punching the nearest wall. "Did you know that the Avatar is supposed to be able to commune with their past lives, gaining access to the wisdom of centuries?" she said. "With the right lessons, you could have been asking Yang Chen herself for guidance right now. But no, you don't have that option because my guess is that the spiritual teachers are a little hard to come by in our current social circle." Rangi waved her hand around at the room, at Hujiang, at the Taiwan Mountains themselves. "To see you here, it kills me. The fact that you're stuck here when no one knows who you truly are makes me die a little inside with each passing moment. You're meant to have the best of everything, and instead you have this." She rubbed at the creases in her forehead with her fingers. "A Dao Fei town. A normal Avatar would have been responsible for wiping this encampment off the face of the earth." So she was upset about Kyoshi neglecting her duties, and nothing more. Rangi wanted a normal Avatar, not whatever Kyoshi was. She's a true believer. Yun's word came back like he was standing beside her, whispering in her ear. Rangi couldn't handle any more disgrace to the office. Kyoshi was poor raw material for an Avatar to begin with, and her selfish choices had only defined that position further. "Rangi." Kyoshi's heart felt harder than it ever had, dull metal weighing in her chest down. The world waited years for an Avatar. It can wait a little longer, and so can you. She thought she heard a little puff of breath come from behind Rangi's hands, but when the firebender lowered her arms, she was as calm and stony as the mountain. "You're right," Rangi said. "After all, I'm just your bodyguard. I have to do what you say." Nightfall did Hujiang a favor in appearance. Unlike honest folk who went to bed soon after the sun went down, the Daofei settlement lit up with torchlight to continue business. The slope of the mountain spread out below the inn looked like it had attracted a cloud of fireflies. A meal of rice gruel and dried sweet potato did little to help them relax. Before they left the inn, Lek tightened the thongs covering his sleeves with such ferocity that Kyoshi was afraid his hands would go purple. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm worried about Peng Peng is all," he said defiantly. "Don't let it slip that we have her. Mok would probably kill us and try to tame her himself." It made more and more sense, the degree to which outlaws coveted a sky bison. Flight was normally a feat restricted to the pure of heart. As an airbender willing to sully herself with dirty work, Kyoshi's mother must have been in high demand. The streets were emptier than during the day. The Daofei had gathered inside drink houses, and drink houses seemed to comprise half the town. Kyoshi could hear laughter and arguments and poorly composed poetry spilling from the windows they passed. She imagined Lao Gi was in one of the taverns, swindling for booze, or indulging in his other old hobby. They came to a house bigger than the others, a broad, high barn that shook with noise. The shouting inside rose and fell in waves, punctuated with cries of delight or disappointment. Another man wearing a peach flower in his hat greeted them at the door. "Uncle Mok is waiting for you on the balcony," he said as he bowed. Going inside, they were immediately absorbed by a throng of spectators. The center of the floor held a large wooden platform covered with a tightly drawn layer of canvas held down with ropes, giving the structure the appearance of a great drum. Two men circled each other wearily on top, stepping through stances, refusing to blink as sweat gathered on their faces. "Lei Tai," Karima said to Kyoshi. "Ever seen one before?" She hadn't. She knew of earthbending tournaments with a similar concept, knock the opponent off the platform and you win. But this stage was made of unbendable material, and the two men were fighting bare-knuckled and empty-handed. Throwing the opponent off would require closing the distance and getting to grips in ways benders normally disregarded. Lek had mentioned the weapons portion of the evening. Now must have been the unarmed combat round serving as a warm-up. The two men charged each other. Fists cracked against skulls. One of them got the better of the exchange and followed up with a devastating kick to the side of his opponent. "Liver shot," Kyoshi heard Rangi mutter. "It's over." She'd seen the outcome before the loser did. He tried to resume his fighting stance, but couldn't raise his arms. In a slow, teetering arc that reminded Kyoshi of a cut tree, he fell to the surface of the platform, clutching his torso. Kyoshi expected the standing man to peacock in victory, spend some time basking in the adulation of the crowd. Instead, he pounced on his drowned opponent, who was clearly unable to continue, and began punching him viciously in the head. "Here's a lesson for you square folk," Wong said. "It's over when the winner says it's over." Kyoshi had to turn away. She heard dull, wet thuds interspersed with the cheers of the crowd and nearly threw up on her feet. She was listening to a man get beaten to death. There was a round of boos and she looked up. The man left standing had decided to stop the assault, though Kyoshi could tell the decision was less about mercy and more about saving energy. He went back to one corner of the platform where attendees had placed a stool for him to sit. He held out his hand and a cup of tea appeared in it. Being the champion came with some perks. Two volunteers carried off his vanquished opponent by the arms and legs. Only a cough of blood spray gave any indication the man was still alive. Kyoshi wanted to get this over with as fast as possible. "Where's Mock?" she said. "There." Kuruma pointed to the second level. Kyoshi's suspicions were correct. This place was a barn. The balcony was a converted hayloft. Mock sat on a giant throne-like chair that had to have been lifted into place with pulleys. Beside him stood the strap-nosed man from the bazaar, the one who'd been recruiting outlaws with spiritual zeal. The flying opera company went up the old-fashioned way, and they had to do it one at a time. The three more experienced members went first. Kyoshi felt eyes on her as she climbed the long ladder, vulnerable with each bounce and sway of the wooden struts. Mock had no guards with him other than the street preacher, and the others had told her neither of them were benders. Either Dao Fei was stingy when it came to personal protection, or they preferred to display strength this way. "This is my lieutenant, Brother Y," Mock said, gesturing to the wild-eyed man. "You will pay him the same respect that you do me." Kyoshi bowed along with the others, but Wei was silent. He stared at the group with seething contempt, like he detected the taint of evil buried deep in their bones. She became conscious of her flayed leg that had scabbed over, with a waking nightmare she'd pushed to the back of her mind. But Wei paid her no special attention. He despised them all equally. Mock, on the other hand, singled Kyoshi out. "New girl," he said. "You seem a little blood-shy just now." "Not a trait I like in my subordinates." Wong and Kuruma tensed up. They'd warned her about the need to keep a certain mask on, and she hadn't taken them seriously enough. Kyoshi tried to think of something to say that would placate Mock. "She's just tough when it counts, Uncle," Beck interjected. "I personally saw Kyoshi wipe the floor with a whole squad of lawmen back in Chameleon Bay." Mock made a signal with his finger. In a motion so smooth that it looked rehearsed, Wai pulled out a knife, grabbed Lek by the hand, and slashed him across the palm. Lek stared disbelievingly at the fresh red wound for a moment. "Funny," Mock said. "I don't think I was talking to you." A spatter of blood landed on the floor. Lek doubled over, clutching his hand to his stomach, and stifled a scream. Wong and Kuruma's faces were white with anger, but they maintained their positions, shoulders hunched in deference. Kyoshi forced herself to look this time, to watch Lek suffer. Mock was testing her, she realized. Her weakness had gotten her companion hurt, and this was the price. Her limbs went cold as a vision of the future swept her in its embrace. She was going to sort this Mock one day. Neatly on the shelf, right below Zhang Shu. Him and Wei both. They'd have a place of honor in her heart. But for now, the face she gave them was made of stone. She saw Lek straighten up and tug his sleeve over the wound, clenching his jaw and fist tight. He stared at the space between his shoes. Other than the bloodstain blooming at the end of his shirt, she would have been hard-pressed to tell that he was injured. "Better this time," Mock said to Kyoshi. "Unless for some reason you don't like the boy." She made a non-committal little shrug. "There's not so many people I hate, Uncle." The truth made it easier to remain calm. "A fast learner indeed." Mock caught a glimpse of something interesting happening below. The crowd roared, half of them booing and the other half expressing wild approval for whatever it was. He grinned and turned his full attention back to the centre of the barn. Not as fast, though, as your firebender friend. Kyoshi followed his gaze. It took all of her newfound willpower not to shriek in horror. Rangi was standing on the fighting platform. The beautiful thing about Lei Tai is that anyone can issue a challenge, Mock said, simply by doing what she's doing. Kyoshi had to look at the empty ladder again to make sure she wasn't dreaming, that Rangi hadn't followed right behind her as usual, to confirm that she could have gone so long without noticing her friend's presence. The champion, still sitting in the opposite corner, cocked his head in interest. Rangi met his gaze as she stripped off her braces and shoulder pieces, throwing her heirloom armor to the ground like a fruit peel. Ignoring howls and whistles from the crowd, she disrobed until she was in the sleeveless white tunic she wore beneath her outer layers. Rangi was above the average height for a girl. The muscles in her arms and back were well formed and strong from years of training, but her opponent was taller and outweighed her by a third, if not more. She looked so tiny and vulnerable on the canvas, a small flower in the corner of a painting. Kyoshi nearly jumped down from the hayloft to throw herself between the combatants, but Karima and Wong gave her the same glance and imperceptible headshake from when Lek was cut. Don't. We'll make it worse. The champion ran a hand down his braided queue and squinted at Rangi with beady eyes. He dabbed himself with a towel and flung it behind him. As he rose, his attendant plucked the stool off the platform. He'd rested enough. The man raised his chin and said a few words that Kyoshi couldn't hear, but she guessed their meaning well enough. No firebending. Rangi nodded in agreement. A lance went through Kyoshi's heart as the two of them approached each other. The champion didn't take a stance immediately. If he took the challenge of a young girl too seriously, he'd lose face. Rangi let him know how wise that decision was by whirling a kick at the knee he was about to put his weight on. Only pure reflex saved him. He snatched his leg back before it snapped in half and stumbled awkwardly around the platform, drunk that had lost his footing. The crowd jeered. This girl, Mock said with a tone of appreciation that sent fresh loathing down Kyoshi's throat. The champion righted himself and took up a deep stance. The disciplined movement in his lower body was at odds with the wrath coursing through his face. As if to taunt him further, Rangi slid forward fiercely until she was within striking distance. Her expression was cool, impassive. It didn't change when the man launched a flurry of blows. She read his limbs like the lines of a book, letting his momentum pass right by her as she made pivots so small and sharp that her feet squeaked against the canvas. After he missed a straight punch that hung over her neck like a yoke, she bumped him in the armpit with her shoulder, timing it with his traction. He went flying back, worse than before, his feet making a clownish attempt to support him. Kyoshi's hope rose, forcing her to her tiptoes as she neared the edge. If he fell off the platform, then his bad dream would end. He managed to catch himself. Kyoshi heard a swear come from someone other than her. Rangi followed her opponent to the boundary but seemed unconcerned about pushing him over. She could have ended it with a nudge. The man saw this and lost his composure. He lashed out with a wild punch devoid of technique. It was so telegraphed that Kyoshi could have ducked under it. But in that instance, Rangi looked upward and locked eyes with Kyoshi. The blow struck her squarely in the face. She let it happen. She tumbled across the platform and landed in the center, a lifeless heap. The weight difference had done its work. Kyoshi's cry was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The champion wiped his mouth as he sauntered over to Rangi's body. The girl had humiliated him. He was going to take his time destroying her. Kyoshi screamed to the rafters, invisible and unheard in the frenzy. Nothing mattered anymore but Rangi. She couldn't lose the center of her being like this. She would have obliterated the world to undo what was happening. Only Wong's hands clamping down on Kyoshi's shoulder held her in place as the man raised his foot high above Rangi's skull. There was a blur of motion and the sound of muffled snapping. Kyoshi's mind caught up with her eyes. Her comprehension played out like a series of pictures, changed between blinks. Rangi had spun out from under the man's foot, rotating on her shoulders like a top, and wrapped her body around his standing leg. She'd made a subtle twist, and his limbs shattered along every plane it could. The champion lay out on the canvas, writhing in pain, his leg reduced to an understuffed stocking attached to his body. Rangi stood over him, bleeding from the mouth. Other than the single punch she'd taken, she was fine. She hadn't broken a sweat. The spectators were silent. Her footsteps bounced off the canvas like drumbeats. She hopped lightly off the platform and gathered up her armor. A single person clapping broke the pall. It was Mock, applauding furiously. It gave the crowd permission to react. They whooped and hollered for their new champion, surging toward her. A single glare made them hold off on slapping her back or lifting her onto their shoulders, but they got as close as they could, forming a little ring of appreciation around her. Rangi made her way over to the ladder and climbed up with one hand, her gear bundled under the other arm. Her head peeked up over the edge of the hayloft, and then the rest of her body. She tossed the armor into the corner and bowed. No one responded. They all waited on her next move, Mock and Wei included. Rangi shrugged at the unasked question. Seemed like fun, she said calmly. Kyoshi knew that was a complete and utter bullpig. There was no reason for her to have such a lapse in judgment, to commit such a mind-bogglingly stupid act. Kyoshi wanted to punch Rangi so hard that she'd land on her rear end back in Yokoya. She was going to throttle the Firebender until flame came out of her ears. Mock slapped his thighs and burst into laughter. A future boss in the making, he said. Dine with me tonight. I'll tell you the plans I have in store. How could we refuse, Uncle? Rangi said with the biggest, sweetest, falsest smile Kyoshi had ever seen. Attendants carried chairs for everyone up the ladder with great difficulty, followed by a table and then food and drink. Unlike the large manners of legitimate society, there was no servant class here. Junior toughs and swordsmen did the task, their weapons clanking in their scabbards as they juggled trays like rookie maids. No one let on that they'd already eaten. The meal was an attempt to mimic a wealthy sage's table with more than one course. Shaped flour paste substituted for ingredients that would have been impossible to get in the mountains, and yellowing vegetables made up the rest. There was plenty of wine, though. Mock sat with his back facing the edge of the balcony. The fights no longer interested him. Judging by the clash of metal coming from below, the challengers had moved on from unarmed combat into the weapons section. The occasional scream and gurgle made it difficult to concentrate. Have any of you heard of Tae Si-hung? He asked, dropping the endless displays of puffery and dominance. As foolhardy as Rangi's fight had been, there was no denying she'd changed the energy of the meeting. Tae Si-hung, Governor Tae. Kyoshi had never seen him in person at the mansion, but the last gifts she remembered him sending to Yoon were an original unabridged copy of Poems of Lagima and a single precious white dragon seed. Governor in the eastern provinces, she said. Likes to read and drink tea. Certainly isn't hurting for money. Very good, Mock said, impressed, even though she could have been describing half of the rich old men in the Earth Kingdom. Tae's a little unique among prefectural leaders. He's not so quick with the axe when it comes to sentencing crimes. He made a hacking motion to the back of his own neck. How light-hearted they were being. Mock took a sip of wine and smiled when Kyoshi refilled his cup without being told. He keeps prisoners instead, he went on. His family inherited an old mansion dating back to the 30-something Earth King, complete with a courthouse and a jail where criminals could serve out their sentences instead of facing swift modern justice. I believe the romantic notion of mercy went to his head. Sounds nice of him, Rangi said, a bit insouciantly. Her face had begun to swell, the words slurring as her lip grew puffy. The other members of their company had willingly retreated into the background, letting her and Kyoshi do the talking. They were playing the tiles they had been dealt. Don't go putting up statues just yet, Mock said. He's had one of our own locked up for 8 years. Behind him, Y positively vibrated, his body thrumming with rage. We need to get our man out of Tae's cells, Mock said. That's what the job is about. A jailbreak on a fortified position is going to take a lot of bodies, more than the Autumn Bloom has sworn members, so we're calling in our associates. Every favor will be repaid in one night. This prisoner, is he important? Rangi asked. Does he have information you don't want leaking? For the first time tonight, Mock looked displeased with her. This mission is about brotherhood, he said, first and foremost. My sworn brother has been rotting in the hands of the law for almost a decade. It's taken that long for the Autumn Bloom to grow strong enough to attempt a rescue mission, but Y and I have never forgotten him. His passion was real, carved into his spirit with deep grooves. He resembled Lek when the boy talked about Kyoshi's parents, propped up by an iron framework larger than himself. Kyoshi wondered if she'd appeared the same as she ever spoke about Kelsang at length to anyone. She hoped so. Apologies, Uncle, Rangi said. I thought knowing the facts would be helpful to our cause. The only facts I need you concentrating on concern how your group is going to help spring my man out of Governor Tae's prison, Mock said. Our group? Kyoshi preemptively tilted an apology for not understanding. It sounded like we were to band together with the Autumn Bloom in this mission. Originally, yes, but after giving it some thought, that would be a waste of an elite team of benders such as yourselves. A two-pronged assault should double our chances. I have numbers at my disposal, but not stealth or bending prowess. While my men beat down the doors in a frontal assault, I want the Flying Opera Company to take the quiet route. Whoever succeeds first, it doesn't matter to me. Rangi was still in professional intelligence gathering mode. Are there plans to Tay's Palace? Layouts? Staff schedules? Any inside people we can count on? Mock's face darkened. He kicked the table away, sending dishes clattering to the floor. What do you think this is, a robbery? He snapped. Figure out your approach on your own. Kyoshi realized why he was so angry. Rangi's questions had exposed him not much of a tactician. He knew nothing of leadership besides making demands and doling out cruelties when they weren't met. Control by tantrum, Kyoshi thought. She had a label for the way Mock wielded power. He stood up and dusted himself off. I plan on being at Governor Tay's palace 30 days from now with my forces. I know how swift the Flying Opera Company tends to be, so if you arrive early, you should have all the time you need to prepare yourselves. But I don't want you acting on your own before we arrive. Do you hear me? I hear many things about you. Of course, Uncle, Kyoshi said. The clash of steel and the scream filled the air as she bowed. The five of them stood outside their inn, not knowing what to say to each other. Fresh distance had come between them. Self-consciousness reigned supreme. Kyoshi broke the silence. Can we agree to leave this forsaken town first thing in the morning? Yes, Wong said. I'm going to drink myself stupid until then. If I run into any of you, I'm going to pretend I don't know you, even if you challenge me. He frowned. Especially if you challenge me. Wong stomped off into the darkness, disappearing beyond the glow of the nearest lantern. Lek hadn't spoken a word on the way back. His sleeve was plastered to his palm with dried blood, a good sign as far as his wound was concerned. But he was possessed by a rigid coldness that had Kyoshi worried. Lek, she said before he vanished too inside his own head. Thank you for standing up for me. He blinked and looked at her as if they'd only met a minute ago. Why wouldn't I? He said, caught waking up from a dream. I have to take care of his hand, Karima said. She looked at Rangi. I'm not the best healer, so it'll be a while before I can get to your face. I don't need it, Rangi said. She turned and walked away in the opposite direction of Wong, down the slope the town was built on. Rangi! Kyoshi snapped. The firebender didn't listen to her. She was Kyoshi's bodyguard. She was obligated to listen to her. Get back here, Rangi! After tonight's display, she's the safest person in Hujiang, Karima said. There was a slight edge to her smile. But I still think you should go after her. Having grown up in Yokoya, Kyoshi had walked enough hills for 2 lifetimes. Going down fast threatened to buckle her ankles, strained at her knees. She found Rangi sitting at the edge of the shallow lake, less by light and more by heat. The firebender was a dark silhouette curled up against the lapping water. Kyoshi entertained the notion of shoving her straight in. You want to tell me what that was about? She yelled. Rangi sneered at the question. Mock was treating us like dung, and now slightly less so. I impressed the Dao Fei. Hasn't that been our goal? My mother's gang belonged to my mother. Mock is a rabid animal whom we have no leverage with. It was a stupid risk. Rangi got to her feet. She'd been letting her toes dangle in the water, and now she stood ankle deep in it. Of course it was, she said. She nearly rammed her finger into Kyoshi's chest out of instinct, but caught herself. She wrung her hands out and forced them to remain at her side. I did exactly what you've been doing this whole time. Let me tell you something, Rangi said. I blacked out when I got hit. If I hadn't woken up quickly, that man would have killed me. Kyoshi's mind went white with fury. After the fight ended, she'd assumed that Rangi had been faking unconsciousness to lure her opponent in. She wanted to march back to the barn and break the rest of his limbs. You know what you felt watching me lie on the canvas? Rangi said. That helplessness, that sensation of your anchor being cut loose. That's what I've been feeling watching you every single minute since we left Yokoya. I got on that platform so you could see it from my perspective. I had no idea what else would get through to you. She kicked at the surface of the lake, slicing a wave between them. For an instant, she looked like a waterbender. I watched you throw yourself headlong into danger over and over again, and for what? Some misguided attempt to bring Zhang Shu to justice? Do you know what that even means anymore? It means he's gone for good, Kyoshi snapped. No longer walking this earth, that's what it has to mean. Why? Rangi said, her eyes begging and combative at once. Why do you need to do this so badly? Because then I don't have to be afraid of him anymore, Kyoshi screamed. I'm scared, all right? I'm scared of him and I don't know what else will make it go away. Her words carried over the surface of the lake to any man and spirit who might be listening. Kyoshi's obsession wasn't the mark of a great hunter on a relentless stalk of her quarry. That was the lie that had sustained her. The truth was that she was a frightened child, running in different directions and hoping it would all work out for the best. She couldn't feel safe with young Shu loose. She heard it again, those soft, sharp little breaths. Rangi was crying. Kyoshi fought back her own tears. They wouldn't have been as graceful. Talk to me, she said. Please. Wasn't supposed to be like this, Rangi said. She tried to smother herself with the palm of her hand. Shouldn't have gone this way. Kyoshi understood her friend's disappointment. The shining new era the world was supposed to get after so many years of strife. The champion whom Rangi had trained to protect had been stolen from them and replaced with Kyoshi. I know, she said, her heart aching. Yoon would have been a much better... No! Forget Yoon for once. Forget being the Avatar. Rangi lost the battle to restrain herself and smacked Kyoshi hard across the collar. It's not supposed to be this way for you. Kyoshi went silent, mostly because Rangi had hit her too hard, but also from surprise. You think you don't deserve peace and happiness and good things, but you do, Rangi yelled. You, Kyoshi, not the Avatar, but you. She closed the distance and wrapped her arms around Kyoshi's waist. The embrace was a clever way to hide her face. Do you have any idea how painful it's been for me to follow you on this journey where you're so determined to punish yourself? She said. Watching you treat yourself like an empty vessel for revenge when I've known you since you were a servant girl who couldn't bend a pebble? The Avatar can be reborn, but you can't, Kyoshi. I don't want to give you up to the next generation. I couldn't bear to lose you. Kyoshi realized she'd had it all wrong. Rangi was a true believer, but her greatest faith had been for her friends, not her assignment. She pulled Rangi in closer. She thought she heard a slight, contented sigh come from the other girl. I wish I could give you your due, Rangi muttered after some time had passed. The wisest teachers, armies to defend you, a palace to live in. Kyoshi raised an eyebrow. The Avatar gets a palace? No, but you deserve one. A warm glow mapped Kyoshi's veins. Eternity distilled in a single brush of skin. She thought she would never be more alive than now. And then, the shock of hands pushing her away. Kyoshi snapped out of her trance aghast. Rangi had flinched at the contact, repelled her, viscerally, reflexively. Oh no. Oh no. This couldn't... Not after everything they'd been through, this couldn't be how it... Kyoshi shut her eyes until they hurt. She wanted to shrink until she vanished within the cracks of the earth. She wanted to become dust and blow away in the wind. But the sound of laughter pulled her back. Rangi was coughing, drowning herself with her own tears and mirth. She caught her breath and retook Kyoshi by the hips, turning to the side, offering up the smooth, unblemished skin of her throat. That side of my face is busted up, stupid, she whispered in the darkness. Kiss me where I'm not hurt. The Beast. The morning sunrise had never been so warm. Kyoshi had slept better on the hard-packed shore of the lake without a bedroll than she had any of the nights spent camping between Chameleon Bay and Hujiang. Perhaps that was because she had her own fire now. She didn't have to share it with anyone else. Rangi murmured into the base of her neck, a soft thrumming sensation. A shadow loomed over them both. Kyoshi blinked until she saw a pair of leather boots next to her head. Kurima squatted down closer to their level, her hands on her knees and her chin in her hands. Have a nice night? The waterbender said, batting her eyelashes. She grinned wider than the open sky. Kyoshi rose to her elbows. Rangi slid off her chest and thumped her head on the ground, startling awake. The leg she'd thrown across Kyoshi's body reluctantly unwound itself. Must have been nice, Kurima said, barely able to contain her laughter. Sleeping under the stars, just two friends, having a close, private moment of friendship. Kyoshi rubbed the drowsiness out of her face. She could leap to her feet and deny everything. She had no idea what would happen if she and Rangi kept pulling on this thread together. Few people in the Earth Kingdom would react anywhere near as well as Kirima. But ever since that day in Yokoya, when she'd learned her fate while her hands were still dusted in white flour, her life had been an endless refusal, full of secrets unhappily kept to their destructive ends. She was sick of denying herself. Not this time. This time would be different. A steady thought. As the drum breathed in her head and heart, let her know the truth. She would never back down from how she felt about Rangi. Rangi caught her gaze and smiled, making a slight belly-there nod. A ready if you are signal. She was. And they were. It's exactly what it looks like, Kyoshi said. You have a problem? Kirima shrugged and waved her fingers, dipping into a moment of quiet seriousness. I'm not the type to give you grief over whom you love, she said. Her mirth returned immediately. I am, however, going to give you tremendous amounts of grief about romancing within your own brotherhood. That's like doing laundry in the outhouse. Never ends clean. Kyoshi got up. First off, we knew each other before we met you. Second, my parents founded this stupid gang, and they were obviously a pair. Good to see you carrying on the family tradition, Kirima said. Jessa and Hark were mad about each other. Nothing could douse the moment for Kyoshi like a reminder of her parents. She wondered if they still kissed, made eyes, whispered jokes after they dropped her in Yokoya. Perhaps unburdening themselves had made their relationship all the sweeter. She didn't want to ask. The darkness of her abandonment must have boiled to her surface as the three of them trudged uphill back toward the town, because Rangi ran the back of her nails down Kyoshi's hand, a playful and teasing distraction that held more meaning now than 100 volumes of history. Kyoshi nearly tripped and fell on her face. If this was what being true to herself felt like, she could never go back. Her heart was nestled somewhere above her in the nearest cloud. She wanted to scoop up Rangi in her arms and run, stepping higher and higher using that technique she still had to learn until they found it. Kyoshi was so happy that Huzhang itself looked prettier in the new light of day. Splotches of colour caught her eye that weren't visible in the torchlight of the previous evening, blues and reds from beyond the Earth Kingdom. The longhouses, she could see now, had individual torches like carved shrine alcoves and Fire Nation rugs hung over doors. It reminded her of the way ships would get personalities imprinted on them by their sailors. Dust had yet to be kicked up by the day's business, and the air was cleaner, easier to breathe without the dingy haze. They strolled through town. When was the last time Kyoshi had a stroll? Had she ever? And sidestepped the strewn bodies of men who slept off hangovers or beatings or both. Kirima led them to one of the larger establishments, where she ducked through a door with one of its posts destroyed, like someone had been thrown out, but not very accurately. She returned moments later, bending a large blob of water that she had to have found inside. It rolled down the steps like a slug. Wong floated inside the reverse bubble, his head poking out the top. He snored comfortably. Wake up! Kirima shouted. With a flick of her arms, the water froze. The big man jolted awake from the cold. He resembled a small iceberg with his face poking out of the summit. Ugh, leave me in this for a while, he said, bleary-eyed. Kirima liquefied the water again, dropping him to his feet and bent it away from his body, leaving him dry as a bone. She hurled the water back inside the building, where it landed with a giant splash. Someone inside screamed and sputtered. You had enough of this town, she said. Then she grinned at Kyoshi and Rangi without any attempt to hide the meaning in her stare. Or at least I have. Wong didn't get the chance to interpret her stage gestures. A loud crashing noise from somewhere near the bazaar punctured the silence of the morning. It sounded like a house might have collapsed. Birds rose into the sky, fluttering in distress. Rangi frowned and leaned her ear toward the disturbance. Was that a landslide? I don't know, Kirima said cautiously. But the birds have the right idea. Now the clamour of men shouting in horror could be heard over the rooflines. Never wait to find out what the trouble is, Wong said, already jogging away from the source. By then you're already too close. If that wasn't ancient wisdom, it should have been. They followed him briskly back toward the inn. Hopefully Lek and Lao Gi were both there ready to fly. Judging by how fast the ruckus was catching up, they wouldn't have time to search the town on Peng Peng. A horrendous snorting, choking sound rolled through the streets. Back in her mansion days, Kyoshi had once seen an ambassador bring a pet poodle monkey that was so inbred in the name of cuteness that it had trouble breathing through its miniaturized snout. That was what she heard now, on a scale 1,000 times larger. The exhortations of a creature that would never get its fill of air. 2 men ran screaming out of a longhouse right on their heels. An instant later, the building front exploded, planks and beams torn to shreds by a dark, wiry mass that writhed with fury. A rope or a whip flung out with the speed of a cable under tension and lashed the men across the back. They fell to the ground, skidding on their faces, momentum making their legs scorpion over their heads. "Tui's gills!" Kurima shouted. "What is that thing?" Behind them was a beast that Kyoshi had never seen the likes of before, a black and brown four-legged monstrosity that stood higher at the shoulder than some of the huts. It managed to be hulking with muscle and yet lissom as a serpent at the same time. Claws as long and sharp as sickle blades reaped at the ground, opening damp wounds under the dusty surface. But the most hideous part of the creature was its dark void of a face. The furry, elongated skull had no eyes, only a flowering pink snout that wriggled with its own fleshy protuberances. It was as if a parasite from another world had attached itself to the nose of an earthly beast and taken control over the entire animal. 2 large dark holes, nostrils, sucked air in all directions until they pointed straight at Kyoshi. She backed away slowly, ineffectually, surprised she could manage that. The nausea of terror chained her, robbed her of survival instinct. Her skin felt wet and cold. Again was the only thought running through her mind. Again, Zhang Shu had loosed a nightmare on her, an inhuman spectre that would drag her away into darkness screaming. It had to be him. There was no one else who could have scraped the depths of her fear like this. Somehow she knew it in her bones that it was he who taunted her with this living aberration. A wall of earth shot up between her and the animal. She hadn't bent it. "What are you doing?" Wong roared as he followed through on his attack. "Either fight or run. Don't stand there where we can't help you." The monster clambered over the wall he made with ease, its claws letting it climb as fast as it ran. Kurima pulled more water from a nearby trough and smashed at the beast's shoulders, trying to knock it off balance. Rangi kicked low sheets of flame at the places it tried to land its forepaws, reasoning that it was as ineffective to break an animal's root as it was a normal opponent. That's right, Kyoshi thought. I'm not alone this time. The street was wide enough to accommodate her earthbending weakness. She knifed at the air in front of her, and the entire surface of the road began to grind and shift. A fissure opened, and one of the animal's paws fell in. If she could close the gap fast enough, she could pin it by the monster, rather than avoid the jaws of her trap, dove headfirst into the rift. Its entire body disappeared below ground, leaving a pile of castings behind. "This thing can burrow?" Kurima sounded more grieved than afraid, like an experienced gambler discovering the table they joined was blatantly rigged against them. Kyoshi felt vibrations beneath her. It was impossible not to with a creature that size, but they were indistinct and directionless. Not a help in this situation. "Spread out," Rangi said, eyeing the ground. "Shouldn't we stay close?" Kyoshi said. "No," Rangi said. "Then it'll get more than one of us in a single bite." Kyoshi may have been feeling warm with newfound camaraderie for her gang. No one had told Wong and Kurima. After hearing Rangi, they immediately leaped onto the roof of the nearest house, elements trailing below the soles of their feet, leaving her and Kyoshi down below. The soil loosened around them, a perfect circle caving in. Rangi tackled Kyoshi out of the center of the formation, boosting herself sideways with flame jets from her feet. They landed hard on their sides, shoulders bruising. The creature burst through the surface, rearing towards the sky, the ground giving birth to a shape of death that blacked out the sun above. There was a zipping sound, and then a thud. The animal screamed, and its claws came down short on Kyoshi and Rangi's bodies. It shook its head furiously. Another impact, and this time Kyoshi saw it. A smooth, fist-sized stone had struck the beast hard on the tip of its sensitive nose, sending it reeling. She looked up and made out Lek's silhouette on the roof of their inn, the sun behind him shrouding his face. "Move, baby!" he shouted. A hail of perfectly aimed stones gave them cover, each missile landing uncannily on this one spot the animal seemed to feel pain, no matter how much it thrashed about. It backed away, trying to hide its nose. As Kyoshi and Rangi fled toward Lek, several arrows struck it in the hindquarters. It turned to face the new threat. The Daofei had gotten over their surprise and were now mobbing the beast, thrusting spears at it and pricking its fur with short bows. They sought the glory of bringing it down. The animal lashed out with its tongue, sending a row of men falling to the ground, but more swordsmen turned hunters stepped over their limp bodies to replace them. Kyoshi didn't care to understand the bizarre scene playing out before her. She and the rest of the group ran for the hills. They arrived at Peng Peng's cave in the mountainside winded, their legs and lungs burning, to find Lao Gi feeding the bison a pile of cabbages. He tossed them one at a time high in the air for Peng Peng to catch between her broad, flat teeth. There was probably no use asking him how he had acquired the produce. "A lot of help you were," Lek shouted. He was assuming, like Kyoshi was at this point, that Lao Gi was completely aware of what had transpired. The old man gave him a pitying look. "Fighting a Shirshu? That's just a bad investment of effort. I left as soon as I felt it coming. You knew what that abomination was? Kirima said. It's a legendary subterranean beast that hunts by scent, he explained dismissively, like they would have known of this if they'd paid better attention to his ramblings. Supposedly, it can track its quarry across stone, water, dirt, thin air. In the old days, Earth Kings would use them to execute their political enemies. For the traitor, let them be hounded by Shirshu until they drop where they stand, far from their homes and the bones of their ancestors. Laogi fed Peng Peng another cabbage. Or at least that's how the saying went. Shirshu haven't been seen in the wild for at least a generation, so I assume this one was being used to hunt a fugitive too. Same as in the days of yore. Kyoshi felt Lek's gaze boring into her. It was going for you, he said. I could see it from the roof of the inn. It was sniffing out your scent. You brought it here. She hesitated. Had she been as smooth as Yoon, she could have come up with a convincing denial on the spot. Before she could say anything, she was preempted by the metallic clanking of blades rattling in the scabbards. They leaned over the cave edge to see a party of swordsmen down below. At the back of the group, exhorting them onward, was Brother Y. Mock's inquisitor looked like he wished to speak with whomever he was searching for very much. I can explain, Kyoshi said quickly. But maybe once we're in the air? There was a silent and a unanimous agreement as they scrambled onto Peng Peng. The truth took a back seat to survival. The Avatar's Masters. Peng Peng graced the skies over the plains of Ba Sing Se. The impenetrable city watched them pass like a silent sentry, the monolithic brown walls a blank face devoid of features. Kyoshi watched the capital sail by. Somewhere in the center of those titanic fortifications was the Earth King, nominally the most powerful person on the continent with armies to command and the wealth of the world at his disposal. Though she'd never dug deep into history lessons, she knew that the records were full of instances where avatars and Earth Kings came to each other's aid. And yet she couldn't go ask him for help. There were no means for a peasant to approach the Earth King that wouldn't result in immediate refusal, or capture, or death. Moreover, courts and cities were Zhang Shu's realm. He'd spent decades cultivating influence among the bureaucrats of Ba Sing Se. Barging in there would be no better than surrendering to Governor Deng back in Chameleon Bay. She looked at her parents' gang. These were the only people she could trust, as sad as that was. Out there was a city that essentially belonged to her enemy. Their allies could fit on the back of a single bison. And they weren't happy with her right now. All right, spill it, Kirima snapped. Who was this man you're feuding with? You said he was a rich and powerful sage. Which one exactly? Tell us the truth. Kyoshi stared at the saddle floor. Before, she'd felt within her rights keeping his name a secret. The decision seemed completely foolish in retrospect. Zhang Shu, Kyoshi said weakly. Zhang Shu, the companion of Kuruk. The architect? Laogi said, rubbing his chin. You aim high, my dear, I'm impressed. The rest of them were not as amused. Their jaws dropped in chorus. Zhang Shu, the gravedigger, Lek yelled. You picked a fight with the gravedigger. I didn't pick the fight, Kyoshi protested. I wasn't lying when I said he killed 2 people I loved. Oh no, we believe that, Kirima shouted. We can believe that plenty. That man has a higher body count than the Septipox. And you ticked him off so badly that he sent a beast out of myth to track you all the way into the Taihua Mountains, Wong said with a sigh. You might as well jump off Peng Peng right now and save ourselves the trouble. Thanks a lot, you numbskull, Lex said. We had a chance of surviving Mock, but if the Butcher of Zulu Pass wants you feeding the worms, then it's only a matter of time before he puts you and us below ground. So Kyoshi wasn't the only one terrified of him. It was a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless that made her feel like she was standing on firmer footing. Outlaws were perhaps the one group who would understand how brutal and dangerous Zhang Shu really was. She closed her eyes. She hadn't known these people for very long. But to her own surprise more than anyone's, she would have felt intolerably guilty if Zhang Shu's efforts to capture her caused them any grievous harm. They deserved not to be swindled, was the way she'd put it. They were owed the full story. He's not trying to kill me, Kyoshi said. He doesn't want me dead. Well, that would be new for him, Kirima said. How are you so privy to his inner thoughts and goals? Because. She took a deep breath to steady herself. I'm the Avatar. It was the first time she'd ever knowingly said the truth out loud. Somehow she'd managed to avoid speaking those 3 specific words in that specific order to Rangi the night they fled Yokoya in the drenching rain. Rangi had already known the Avatar was either her or Yoon, so context had sufficed. Kyoshi's confession hung in the air, as visible as smoke. She waited for the rest of them to recover from the blow that had staggered Rangi, Kelsang, and everyone else who belonged to the small circle of knowledge at one point in time or another. They might have needed a moment to recalibrate their view of the world. "Ha!" Lex said. "Ha!" Or maybe they'd just laugh in her face. Lek rolled back on the floor of the saddle, finding her moment of ultimate honesty a good joke, a relief from his jangled nerves. "You, the Avatar? Man, I've feared some whoppers, but that might be the best yet." "I know I let you gloss over a bunch of the oaths," Karima said to her, "but at least 5 of them are about never lying to your sworn family." "She is the Avatar," Rangi said. "Why do you think she has a Fire Nation bodyguard?" "Dunno," Wong said with a shrug. He pointed his thumb at Karima. "Why do you think we've got her?" The waterbender gave him a dirty look before continuing. "Look, you can believe in your weird little 2-person cult all you want," she said to Kyoshi. "Just tell us what you stole from the gravedigger. You wouldn't be the first servant who bungled a theft and had to flee from their angry boss." Kyoshi couldn't believe it. She had it all wrong. She thought that her Avatar herd was the final secret, a gilded treasure that needed to be kept in a series of locked chests until the exact right moment. It turned out that without proof, the information was worth less than the paper it was written on. She squeezed one of the fans in her belt out of frustration. "Do you even bend all 4 elements?" Wong said. "Do you?" "I firebent once," she said, realizing how stupid she sounded as she said it. "Under duress. It, came out of my mouth, like dragon's breath." She thought about trying to do a fire fist, but it felt like a bad idea given the lack of space and how badly her last one went. "Yeah, I once got food poisoning from dodgy fireflakes too," Lex said. "Doesn't mean I'm the reincarnation of Yang Chen." "Well, I believe her," Lao Gi said with a proud, upturned chin. Judging by the other's expressions, his endorsement had the opposite effect. Okay, Karima said. "Everyone calm down. Take a breather. Let's consider this rationally for a minute. Assuming she is the— Kyoshi, think fast!" She uncorked her water skin with a sleight of hand. A pellet of liquid flew at Kyoshi's face. Kyoshi made an undignified squeal that should have disqualified her from holding any office whatsoever. She still couldn't bend any piece of earth smaller than a house, and the water aimed at her eyes made her flinch like a prickle snake had wandered into her sleeping bag. She threw her arms over her face. "Spirits above," Lek whispered. Her cheeks burned in shame. Sure, she looked bad, but that bad? "Kyoshi," Rangi said, breathless and thrilled. "Kyoshi!" The fan she'd been holding had come out of her belt as she clenched up in surprise. She was gripping it the wrong way, like a dagger. The tip of the weapon pointed to the little blob of water hovering in midair. "Is that you?" Rangi said to Karima. The stunned waterbender shook her head. Rangi dove at Kyoshi. The water fell on her back, splashing them both. She squeezed Kyoshi in a ferocious embrace. "You did it!" she yelled. "You bent another element!" As Kyoshi struggled to breathe when an ecstatic firebender wrapped around her neck, she stared at the fan in her hand. Her mother's weapon had made the difference somehow, in both the element and the amount. She was sure of it. She looked up at the faces of the Dao Fei. Lao Gi had a cool, knowing expression. The rest were shocked into submission. They'd been smuggling valuable cargo the whole time. They settled down in one of the innumerable abandoned quarries that supplied the middle and upper rings of Ba Sing Se. The marker of wealth for most Earth Kingdom citizens was whether your house was built with stone from the ground below it. The farther the rock had to travel, the fancier it was. This quarry followed a seam of marble. A small canyon had been mined out in perfectly square blocks, leaving the edges protruding with right angles. They landed on a flat surface of swirled grey and white, resembling tiny figures in a giant fountain basin. The regularity of the stone features laid on top of the natural rock formations made Kyoshi's vision blur. The first sight that something was off was Wong. He dismounted first and then reached up to help Kyoshi down. She frowned, assuming he was more likely to pick her pocket than act as a footman. She jumped off the other side of the saddle. Once they were all on solid ground, the original members of the Flying Opera Company backed away from her. "We need a moment to confer," Karima said. Kyoshi and Rangi shared uncertain glances with each other while the Dao Fei huddled on the far side of the marble cube, murmuring and whispering. Occasionally, one of them would poke their head up like a singing groundhog and give Kyoshi a hard, assessing stare before returning to their debate. "If they turn on us," Rangi whispered sideways through a forced smile, "I want you to take Peng Peng and run. I'll buy you time to escape." Kyoshi found that scenario too distressing to think about. The sudden end of the gang's discussion forced her backbone straighter. They filed back over to Kyoshi and Rangi, as grim and wary and determined as the first night they'd met. Kyoshi sucked in her breath through her teeth as Lex stepped forward, a mirror of that night they'd almost come to blows. "It's been our honor to have traveled with the Avatar," he said. "We regret that we have to part ways." They bowed in unison, not using the Dao Fei salute, but with their hands formally at their sides. Kyoshi blinked. "Huh?" "It doesn't have to be right now if that's not your wishes," Kurima said. "I suppose you might want the night to plan your next move and leave us in the morning." It was the politeness more than anything that threw her off. "Huh?" They seemed as confused as she was. "You're the Avatar," Wong said. "You can't stay with people like us. That'd be an offense to the spirits or something. Not to mention too dangerous," Lex said. He ran his fingers over his palm where a blotchy red line remained, the artifact of Kurima's imperfect healing. "We're still obligated to join the attack on Governor Taze. If we bail, Mock would find us eventually. When he does, well, being killed by a Shurshu would be kinder." "You'll be safer the further away you are from us," Kurima said. Kyoshi's mind reeled. Were they protecting her? She'd been so certain that the first people who discovered identity would take her hostage or rat her out to Jiangsu. The Avatar was a tool. The Avatar was leverage. The master of all four elements lay somewhere between a bargaining chip to get what you wanted and a blunt-forced hammer to be swung at the many imperfections riddling the world. "No, you just thought that way because of how Jiangsu treated Yun." "Kyoshi, they have a point," Rangi said. "If you fall deeper into Mock's clutches, it will taint you forever." That was true. She cared at all about being the Avatar, about someday holding the office and performing its duties as Yun had already begun to do, then she had to part ways with the Flying Opera Company and their debts. Otherwise, the association with criminals would mark her indelibly. She'd be unclean. The history of the Avatars contained rebels, enemies of tyrants, those who stood alone against the armies of the four nations when necessary. But as far as Kyoshi knew, none had been self-serving outlaws. Time had always proven her predecessors in the right and shown them as champions of justice. Yun had told her that most Dao Fei respected the Avatar. She looked at her parents' gang and saw their swagger gone, their cloak of daring and confidence torn wide open. They laid themselves bare in the presence of the living bridge between mankind and spirits. She couldn't explain what was so familiar about this situation, nor why she felt so compelled. The Flying Opera Company was not a bunch of innocent victims like the hostages kidnapped by Tagaka, needing a higher power to reach down and change their futures. They should have been capable enough without her, just like Yun. They reminded her of Yun when he needed Kyoshi beside him on the iceberg. They were her friends, and they were in a bind. Kyoshi didn't turn her back on her friends. She swallowed her own misgivings and made up her mind. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "I'm staying, and if I can help with the autumn bloom, I will. I haven't gotten my end of the bargain yet." The gang perked up. Logically, her promise should have made no difference to them. She'd been dead weight since the beginning, only useful because of Peng Peng. But they glanced at her with wonder in their shifting eyes, the same nervousness she knew she felt when Kelsang had tracked her down for the first time and lifted her out of the dirt. "You'd sully yourself with me?" "Kyoshi," Rangi said. "Think about this to its end. The Avatar can't be seen attacking the residents of an Earth Kingdom official." "As far as the Abiders are concerned, I'm not the Avatar yet," Kyoshi said. "I took the oath of this group. I won't abandon my sworn brothers and sisters." Her choice of words was not lost on them, or Rangi. The Firebender was torn between being critical of Kyoshi's judgment and being proud that she'd brought personal honor into the issue. "You are not ready for anything resembling a real fight," Rangi said. "Currently, you are the group's biggest weakness. You're too valuable to lose, and you don't have the skills to defend yourself." "That's a little harsh," Lex said. Of all people. "Hairpin's right," Kurima said to Kyoshi. "Currently. We have until the next full moon to link up with Mock's forces for the assault. We can finally give you the training you were hoping for." "That's what we promised you, wasn't it?" "It takes years for the Avatar to master all four elements," Rangi snapped. "And that's with world-class teachers. I don't get the impression that any of you have a bending lineage to speak of." Kurima grinned. "No, but I've always wanted to start one. I'm not going to pass up the chance to go down in history as the Avatar's water-bending master." Kyoshi could practically hear Rangi's blood boil. Through her mother's side, her family belonged to an unbroken line of bending teachers who were considered some of the finest in the Fire Nation. They tutored members of the royal family. This plan required to accept the shame they'd put off for so long. The most important bender in the world would have to bow to rabble. Dao Fei watched the agony play out on Rangi's face. They were highly amused. "Lighten up," Lex said. "We'd be teaching Kyoshi to survive, not turning her into Yang Chen. Consider the raid on Tay as a practical exam." Whatever worshipfulness Kyoshi detected earlier had completely vanished from their attitude. Kyoshi supposed she had only herself to blame, telling them to think of her as their sister instead of the Avatar. "Speaking of Yan Chan, we're out of luck for airbending anyway," Karima added. "Either the two of you accept a few improvisations, or Kyoshi remains the way she is. Weak, defenseless, a helpless, pitiable babe in the woods who can't—" Kyoshi aimed beyond Karima's shoulder and pulled a massive cube of stone out of the far side of the canyon. It went crashing down the cliff face, its corners shearing off, a die cast by a spirit the size of a city. The boulder hit the canyon floor and fractured into an army of slabs and shards that teetered on their ends before falling over flat. Despite the noise, Karima didn't give the landslide a single glance. She stared at Kyoshi, impassive, unimpressed. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she said. "You need more than one trick in your bag." Kyoshi felt the evening wash by her like the wind passing through the branches of a tree. The gang was content to leave her be for now. They chatted excitedly to themselves around the fire. The Avatar had volunteered to stay by their side. Their every move forward carried a tinge of spiritual righteousness. Kyoshi gave it a day before the shine wore off. Rangi was in a mood all her own. After camp chores were finished, she hopped to a different stone cut out entirely to meditate. By herself, it was made pretty clear. They talked about the anguish of watching each other take risks, but neither of them had made any promise to stop. They couldn't. Not now. Kyoshi watched the stars fade in and out of the sky, screened and unveiled in turn by the clouds that were as invisible in the darkness as black-clad stagehands moving the settings of a play. She was waiting for the others to fall asleep. She waited for a particular hour that belonged neither to this day nor the next, when time felt jellied and thick. Kyoshi got up and moved to the next cubicle platform of the quarry, and then the next. Without dust-stepping, it was slow going. She had to clamber up and down the height changes. She didn't want to wake the others with noisy orthodox earthbending. The old man stood at the mouth of the marble seam with his back turned to her. Sometimes she wondered if Lao Gi wasn't a shared hallucination, or an imaginary friend exclusive to her. The others could have been humouring her, nodding and smiling every time she talked to a patch of empty space. "I thought you would come to me in Huzhang," he said. "I suppose you had other priorities on your mind." Kyoshi bowed, knowing he could tell if she did. "Apologies, Sifu." But in her thoughts, the unease ballooned. If he had a problem with Rangi, then... Lao Gi turned around. There was a smile in his eyes. "You don't have to forsake love," he said. "Killing's not some holy art form that requires worldly abstinence. If anything, that's lesson 2. She swallowed around the block in her throat. She'd been full of bluster the first night she went to him in secret. But she'd been so used to false starts and stymied progress that continuing their conversation felt like foreign territory. More doubt seeped into her cracks. "Lesson 2 should scare you to the bone," Lao Gi said. "You can take a life before the sun comes up, eat breakfast, and go about your day. How many people might you pass on the street who are capable of such callousness? Many more than you think. Zhang Shu certainly was. He pulled her alone to safety, leaving Yun behind in the clutches of that unholy spirit. That was the moment he'd marked his once prized pupil as having no further use, the way a dock worker might paint an X on a crate of cargo fouled by seawater. Total loss, not worth the recovery effort. And then there was what he'd done to Kelsang. "Fancy yourself different?" Lao Gi said, noticing her stillness. She could still feel Zhang Shu's hands gripping her. "I won't know until I try," she said. The old man laughed, a single bark that pierced the night. "I suppose you'll get the chance soon. In the heat of battle, you can excuse the act away well enough. Fling an arrow here, hack away with a sword there. You and your victim are just 2 of many, acting in self-preservation. Is that how you want to deal with your man? With chaos as your shroud? Do you want to shut your eyes, hurl an overwhelming amount of death in his direction, and hope he's disposed of when you open them?" "No," she said. Remembering what she'd been robbed of, what she'd never get back because of Zhang Shu, brought a surge of conviction. "I want to look him in the eye as I end him." Lao Gi reacted as if she'd made a saucy quip, pursing his lips in amusement. "Well then, he said. In that case, during the raid, you and I are going to split off from the others. We'll head further into the palace than anyone else, and we're going to assassinate Governor Tay. Wait, what? The certainty she had regarding Zhang Shu caused her to mentally stumble at the mention of another target. It was as if she was the late high fighter throwing an all-or-nothing punch at Rangi, who definitely turned her momentum against her. Why would we do that? For you, it's practice, Lao Gi said. For me, it's because he's my man. Listen, Governor Tay is brutally incompetent and corrupt. His people go hungry. He skims from the Earth King's taxes to enrich his own coffers, and in case you haven't noticed, he doesn't have a good policy for handling Dao Fei. Those aren't excuses to murder him. You're right. They're not excuses. They're ample justifications. I guarantee you that many citizens have suffered immeasurably from his greed and negligence, and many more will die if he is allowed to keep breathing. Lao Gi spread his hands wide as if to embrace the world. Tay and his ilk are parasites leeching strength and vitality from the kingdom. Imagine yourself as the predator that keeps the land healthy by eliminating the sources of its weakness. It was said of Kuruk that he was the greatest hunter that ever walked the four nations, but from what I know, he never made man his quarry. I'm hoping you can be different. The idea of becoming a beast free of thought and culpability was supposed to help, but it made her shudder instead. What gives you the right to decide? She asked. Are you part of another brotherhood? Are there more people like you? Is someone paying you? He shook his head, dodging her questions. Doesn't everyone have the right to decide? He said. Isn't the Avatar a person like me? Someone who shapes the world with their choices? She was going to protest that no, the Avatar had the recognition of the spirits and four nations, but she found her tongue tied in the wake of his argument. He gripped his forearms behind his back and gazed across the canyon. I would declare the lowliest peasant is like the Avatar in this regard. All of our actions have an impact. Each decision we make ripples into the future, and we alter our landscapes according to our needs. To keep her crops alive, a farmer uproots the weeds that nature has placed in her fields, does she not? People aren't weeds, Kyoshi said. It was the best she could manage. He turned to face her. I think it's a bit late to claim the moral high ground, given what your aims are. She flushed hot in her cheeks. Zhang Shu murdered 2 of my friends with his own hands, she spat. He doesn't deserve to get away with it. If you took him out for me instead of targeting some random governor, I could reveal myself as the Avatar. I would be safe. Her resolve was wavering left and right. Not a minute ago, she was yowling about doing the deed herself, feigning a hard soul, and now she was begging Grandfather to make the bad man go away. Lao Gi smirked. No one in this world is random. I don't care to kill Zhang Shu. He's competent and he surrounds himself with competent people. I wish the Earth Kingdom had 100 Zhang Shus. We'd enter a new golden age. And yet you're not trying to stop me from ending him. For this case, I won't intervene one way or the other. Besides, what kind of teacher would I be if I took my student's examination for her? A rich one, Kyoshi muttered. Tutors swapping identities with the children of wealthy families so they could pass the government tests needed for prestigious administrative jobs was a common practice across the Earth Kingdom. Pulling off the con paid very well. Lao Gi burst out laughing. Oh, I do like our little chats. Here's an assignment for you in the meantime. He jumped up to a higher level without the aid of bending and without much effort at all. The leap was higher than Kyoshi's head. Many of Governor Tay's personal guard will die in Monk's raid, he said, disappearing past the edge of the stone, his voice already beginning to fade. Soldiers who are simply doing their jobs. His servants will be caught in the violence as well. What will you do then, Avatar? Kyoshi hopped in place, her eye poking above the surface of the cube he'd landed on, trying to catch one last glimpse. It was empty. Lao Gi was already gone. She slumped against the marble wall. The concept of collateral damage had lingered in the back of her mind, but Lao Gi had circled it in ink, made it ache, the same way Rangi pointed out flaws in her horse stance. She had no idea how she was going to take part in this action, fulfill her promise to her newfound brotherhood, without getting her hands dirty. The promise had been so easy to make at the time. She stared miserably at the opposite side of the mined-out gulf, sleep coming to her before a solution could. She woke up, sprawled flat on the hard marble surface. She must have shifted during the night. 4 figures loomed over her, making an arc of their upside-down faces. Oh, look, Kuruma said. Our precious little student is trying to get away and shirk her training. Wong stopped the ground. The marble under Kyoshi tilted like a frying pan, dumping her to her feet. He preferred her fan's handles toward her. I get you first, he rumbled. A warm-up before you start bending. Top Knot told us all about your little weakness, Lex said, backing away with a look of superiority on his face. That you can't bend small pieces of earth. I believe my words were completely and utterly lacks precision, Rangi said, sniffing in contempt. She ignored Kyoshi's glare. Don't worry, Lex said. By the time we're done with you, you'll be able to bend the crud out of your own eye. Catch! He whipped the stone that appeared in his hand at Kyoshi's face. Only the fact that Wong had her fans held out right there let her snatch one in time to protect herself. As the arm snapped open and she earthbent through the weapon, the stone stopped in midair. It reversed course at full speed and struck Lek in the forehead. He doubled over. Ow! He screamed. I was aiming above you! Wait, so you can bend small things? Karima said, upset by the revelation. Were you lying to us again? I have to tell you, I'm getting really fed up with the secrets. I'm bleeding here! This is worse than Rajang! That's not how you open the fan, Wong roared indignantly. You could have damaged the leaf. Amid the shouting, Rangi buried her face in her hands. She seemed to have a headache that rivaled Lek's. Kyoshi agreed with her. The official training of the Avatar was off to a great start. Preparations. The journey to Tay's palace was a painful blur. Each moment spent on solid ground was devoted to training. The Dao Fei adopted their new roles as her teachers with relish. Criminals liked their hierarchies, and the Flying Opera Company had just established a brand new one, with Kyoshi at the bottom. No, Wong shouted. It's fan open, fan close, high block, dainty step backward, big lunge forward, leg sweep. The fan is not a weapon. It's the extension of your arm. The man had never been much for words before, but when it came to fighting with the fan, he transformed into a tyrannical stage director, with the ego and perfectionism to match. I could remember the moves better if you didn't make me sing the full works of Wan Zhen while we do this, Kyoshi said, huffing and puffing in the open field they landed in. The rest of the group sat in the shade of a persimmon tree overlooking an empty field, munching on the astringent fruit and enjoying the breeze while Kyoshi toiled under the sun. Wong was highly offended. The singing is breath control practice. Power and voice both come from the center. Again, with emotional content this time. No matter how difficult fan practice got, she toughed it out. The rewards were bounding leaps in progress with her earthbending. With her fans in hand, she could narrow her focus to kick rocks at targets and raise walls of stone like a normal earthbender, albeit one with a sloppy, informal technique. Still, after all those years of fearing she'd destroy the countryside with the smallest act of bending, using her mother's weapons was liberating. It was so effective, it felt like cheating. It is cheating, Lex said as they volleyed pebbles back and forth at each other in the mouth of the cave while the others set up camp. Sure, some earthbenders amplify their powers with weapons like hammers and maces, but what are you going to do if you don't have your fans? Ask for a rules change? How is someone going to steal my fans? Kyoshi said. The fight at the pebbles picked up speed, their arcs growing sharper. I always have them with me. Might not be theft, Lex said. You might voluntarily leave them behind. The first rule of smuggling is don't get caught with the goods. Your parents knew that. That's probably why they stashed the fans with you in that Hickabida town. Kyoshi's temper flared. One, she found herself longing for Yokoya these days, much to her surprise. Not the people, but the harsh, wild landscape where the wooded mountains met the sea and salt air. The interior Earth Kingdom often felt like a brown monotone, a flat expanse that changed little from one landing site to the next. She decided she didn't appreciate people looking down on the unique little part of it where she'd met Kelsang. And two, she'd never gotten over the resentment she felt towards Lek. Each moment her parents had spent with him instead of her. Didn't matter if he was simply a gang member to them. They'd found him useful, decided he had a purpose. Her? Not so much. She could have explained her feelings to him. Instead, she sliced at the flying pebbles with her fans, cracking them cleanly into hemispheres, and sent twice as many projectiles back at Lek. Can you do that with or without a weapon? He yelped and threw himself to the floor. The shot blast of stone zinged into the cave wall above him, showering him in dust. Playtime had gotten far too rough. I'm sorry, Kyoshi cried out, covering her mouth in horror with the spread fan. She could have put out his eye or worse. He got up with a scowl on his face, but then he remembered something. His glower turned into a grin so smug it could have illuminated the rest of the cave. It's fine, he said, patting the dirt off his pants. You'll have to tell Rangi about your lapse in control. Whatever remorse Kyoshi felt vanished. You snot-nosed little... He raised a finger patiently like an enlightened guru. Bup, bup! That's Sifu snot-nosed to you. Kyoshi could firebend without her fans. That one bad attempt after their escape from Chameleon Bay was a distant memory. Since then, some kind of blockage had cleared. The flame felt straightforward, a power that merely needed to be set free instead of prodded or manipulated like earth. It made no sense to her how she had a critical weakness with a native element, but could produce fire decently for a beginner. The reason could have been that Rangi was a great teacher, as might be expected from the scion of great teachers. No, Rangi said. It's your emotional state. The little training area they'd built stood at the end of an isolated shepherd's path leading away from the most small town in a valley below. Rangi faced her on a long, narrow beam of earth that she'd ordered Kyoshi to raise from the ground. Balancing on it was hard enough, but then they'd started to run through firebending forms and light sparring. The linear exercise meant she'd need to concentrate on resisting and overcoming with positive Jing instead of staying still or evading. Of all bending disciplines, fire is the most affected by inner turmoil, Rangi said, punching a flame downward at Kyoshi's front foot, forcing her to pull it back. The fact that it's coming easier to you now means you're feeling more relaxed and natural. Kyoshi snap-kicked her new leading leg. A crescent of fire sliced upward, and Rangi had to reconsider how much pressure she wanted to apply. Isn't that a good thing? Kyoshi asked. No, why would it be? You feel loose and breezy when you're surrounded by Dao Fei, about to risk your life for them in what's essentially an act of treason against the Earth Kingdom? Rangi spun on the balls of her feet, perfectly centered, with more dance-like beauty than Kyoshi could ever have mustered. A horizontal skirt of flame billowed out from her waist, exactly at the height too awkward for Kyoshi to jump over or duck easily. Rangi hadn't accounted for her opponent's complete lack of shame. Kyoshi dropped to her belly like a worm, hugging the sides of the beam for stability, and let the wave of fire pass over her. She popped back up to see Rangi looking at her with disapproval in her eyes, and it was about more than her lowly escape. You're firebending now, Rangi said. Dare I say you might even be good at it. There's no reason to continue on this path. We could go to the sages and prove you're the Avatar. Kyoshi thought this matter had been settled, but apparently not. Which ones exactly? She said. Because the only sages I know are the names from Zhang Shu's guest lists. Should we try Liu Beifong, the man who thinks of Zhang Shu like his own son? Or maybe someone at the court of Omashu. Omashu is practically his summer home. We could go to my mother, Rangi said, her voice barely audible. Kyoshi dropped her fighting stance. If she caught a fireball to the face, she deserved it. She'd essentially separated Rangi from her only family. It was a nagging guilt that Kyoshi had been able to ignore solely because of her friend's strength. This was the first time Rangi had cracked along that plane. Do you really think she'd take our side over this? Kyoshi asked. She didn't mean for the question to be defiant. The friendship between the Avatar's companions in eras past was the stuff of legend. It was said that two of Yang Chen's close friends and bending teachers had died protecting her from her enemies. The prospect of Heiran choosing Zhang Shu over her own daughter had to be considered. Rangi's face wilted further. I don't know, she said after a while. Her shoulders were heavy with dejection. I couldn't be certain. I guess if we can't trust my own mother, then we can't trust anyone. Did not feel good to win this argument. Kyoshi stepped along the beam carefully until she could put her arms around Rangi. I'm sorry, she said. I have taken so much from you. I don't know how to make it right. Rangi wiped her nose and pushed Kyoshi away. You can start by promising me you'll be a great Avatar, a leader who's virtuous and just. The comment knocked Kyoshi off balance better than a kick to her knee. She couldn't reconcile her friend's righteous desires with the dark conclusions of Lao Gi. Entertaining the wisdom of an assassin was already a betrayal of Rangi's trust. What would happen if Kyoshi took the old man's test and passed? Rangi lined up a big attack to knock her off the beam, purposefully exaggerating her own motions and openings to let her student counter-hit her. But Kyoshi couldn't capitalize on them. She backed away until she ran out of space, forlornly waving her hands in a mockery of firebending, heat sputtering from her fingers. Luck intervened before she humiliated herself further. You two have been here all morning, Karima called out as she approached along the trail. It's my turn with Kyoshi. Buzz off, Rangi yelled. She took the fire she'd been wielding between her hands and redirected it high above Karima's head. Since the night they'd spent in the marble quarry, Rangi's personal attitude towards Karima had gone steeply downhill. Kyoshi had no idea why. They were both talented benders who'd married intelligence with precision. She'd trust either of their judgments in a pinch. Karima didn't flinch from the fire blast. The waves of heat fluttered her hair and illuminated her sharp face in golden hues, an effect that was rather pretty. You're not setting a very good example for the baby Avatar, Topknot. Too much rage will stunt her growth. Stop calling me that! Rangi fumed. Maybe that was it, the constant teasing. Kyoshi wondered how Rangi put up with the nickname for so long. In the Fire Nation, hair was heavily linked with honor. She'd heard that sometimes the losers of an important Agni Kai would shave parts of their head bald, laying patches of their scalp bare to symbolize an extra level of humility from their defeat. But the top knot was always sacred. It was never touched except in circumstances akin to death. Kirima bowed in mockery. "As you wish, my good hot woman. I'm coming back in 5 minutes." After she disappeared, Kyoshi put a hand on Rangi's shoulder. "Something happened between the two of you." Rangi responded with her new favorite way of avoiding the subject. "Stance training," she said. "We already did stance training. Lex said you went berserk in the cave. Moving to 2 a day. Horse, now." Kyoshi groaned and pressed her feet together. She shuffled them to the sides, alternating between heels and toes until they were wider than her shoulders. She kept quiet as she lowered her waist. Or else Rangi would make her hold a log or some other heavy object they could find lying around. Rangi circled her, looking for any weakness where she could strike. "Do not move," she said, right before stepping carefully onto Kyoshi's bent knee. "I hate you so much," Kyoshi yelled as Rangi draped her body weight over her shoulders. "The exercise is to maintain composure in the face of distraction. Now maintain!" Kyoshi put up with the asymmetrical agony until Rangi dropped back down to the ground. "I don't want her teaching you water bending," Rangi said as she moved threateningly into Kyoshi's blind spot. "Why?" Kyoshi felt Rangi leap onto her back, clinging to her like a rucksack. "Ah, why?" "There's a proper order to training the Avatar," Rangi said. "The cycle of the seasons. Earth, fire, air, water. It's not good to deviate from that pattern. You have to master the other elements before water." "Again, why?" "There are only 4 airbending temples in the world. If she tried to seek out a master there, Zhang Shu would find her more easily than anywhere else." "Because," Rangi snapped, "they say bad things happen when an avatar tries to defy the natural order of bending. Ill fortune befalls them." Kyoshi had never known Rangi to lean on superstition. Tradition, however, was another matter. She could tell that each time they ignored an established practice regarding the avatar, the knife twisted in Rangi's heart a little bit more. But Kyoshi owed it to her not to make a promise she couldn't keep. "I'm going to use every weapon I have at my disposal," she said. That was the truth. Rangi let go of her. "I know. I can't stop you from training with Kirima. It's just that as soon as you start waterbending in earnest, our chance to do things the right way dies. Forever. It can't be brought back." Hearing it phrased that way made Kyoshi glummer than she'd expected. She stared at the ground in front of her. Rangi's feet came into view. "Come on," she said. "Cheer up. I didn't mean to send you into a spiral." "I can't cheer up. I'm in horse stance." "I like your focus," Rangi said, "but see if you can withstand this." She slid between Kyoshi's arms and gave her a head-tilting, knee-buckling kiss, as powerful and deep as the ocean after a storm. Kyoshi's eyes went wide before they shut forever. She sank into heavenly darkness. Her backbone turned to liquid. "Maintain," Rangi murmured, her lips like a feather on Kyoshi's before she attacked again, with added ferocity this time. Kyoshi never wanted the torment to end. Rangi pressed into her like metal glowing on an anvil, scorching her where their skin met. Fingers ran through Kyoshi's hair, twisting and pulling to remind her how delightfully at the Firebender's mercy she was. After 100 years had passed, Rangi broke contact, gently and deliberately breathing a wisp of steam down Kyoshi's neck, a parting gift of heat that drifted underneath her clothes. She leaned in for one last seductive whisper. "You still have 7 minutes left to go," Rangi said. Kyoshi kept her complaints to herself. It was a decent trade, all things considered. "Your water and air chakras are overflowing," Lao Gi said. He sounded like it was an embarrassment, as if Kyoshi had wandered outside her home without being fully dressed. She'd braved coming to him while the others were still awake, bedded down by the embers of the campfire. Rangi was probably staring at the sky, vigilant to her last moments of consciousness. Lao Gi lay on his side in the grass, his head propped upon his hands so he could watch a pair of fireflies circle each other, tracing erratic patterns through the air. Kyoshi had long since gathered the man had very little need to ever look at her. "I don't know what chakras are," she said. "What they are is either open or closed. For the sake of predictability, I prefer working with people who have all 7 of them open or all 7 of them closed. An accomplice with only some of their chakras unblocked can easily swayed by their strongest, most gnarled-up emotion." Kyoshi assumed the term had something to do with energy movement within the body. Not much of a stretch, since controlling internal chi was the basis of all bending. "Your feelings of pleasure and love are butting up against the wall of grief," he said. "And guilt. Grief I can work with, but guilt makes for a poor killer. Have you second thoughts about your man?" "No," she said. Never. Lao Gi rolled over onto his side. She waited, letting him examine her to see she wasn't bluffing. Zhang Shu was part of her blood by now. He was the back of her hands. But this Tay person was not. I don't know if I can help you kill the governor, she said. Helping Mok free a prisoner is one thing, but an assassination in cold blood is another. Kyoshi wondered why she didn't reject Lao Gi immediately the other night. Speaking the action out loud made it ludicrous. There's no reason for me to help you. The old man blew his nose in his sleeve. Have you ever heard of Guru Shoken? He asked. Kyoshi shook her head. He was an ancient philosopher, a contemporary of Lagima's. Not as popular, though. He had a proverb. If you meet the spirit of enlightenment on the road, slay it. She wrinkled her brow. I can see why he's not popular. Yes, he was considered heretical by some, but wise by others. One interpretation of that particular saying is that you cannot be bound by petty concerns of your personal journey. You must walk with a singular purpose. The judgment of others, no matter how horrific or criminal they label your actions, must hold no meaning to you. I can't do that, Kyoshi said. I care what she thinks of me. I don't know if I could handle disappointing her. Lao Gi knew whom Kyoshi was talking about. Your hesitation seems to be less about your own morals than hers. In fact, without your firebender tethering you to this world, you might feel no compunction at all. Perhaps that's why you feel guilt. You're only one step away from Guru Shoken's ideal, and it disturbs you. This was the sorry state of Kyoshi's avatarhood. Heartlessness, the new enlightenment. Murder, the means to self-discovery. If she ever resurfaced in the legitimate world, she would create a stain as dark as loam in the history books. Don't look so compromised, Lao Gi said. Young Chen was a devoted reader of Shoken. Kyoshi glanced up at him. She studied his opponents as well, he said, but I don't feel like giving you their philosophical arguments. It doesn't serve my purposes. She remembered the notes in her mother's journal about the rumoured longevity of Tai Guai the Immortal. Are you him? She said. Are you Shoken? If her wild accusation was right, it would have made the man before her older than the four nations themselves. Lao Gi snorted and rolled on his back, closing his eyes. Of course not. He settled in to sleep. I was always much better looking than that fool. Conclusions. Zhang Shu had learned his lesson. No caravans, no roads. As soon as he received the message from the Shirshu tracker team delivered by Hawk, he'd gone through the enormous, preposterous expense of buying rare eel hounds, the fastest cross-country mounts beside a flying bison, a whole herd of them. In the annals of the Earth Kingdom, ancient nomadic barbarians had travelled great distances, surprising foot-slogging armies with such tactics. A single rider would bring multiple mounts on a journey, switching between them on the fly to keep the animals as fresh and speedy as possible. From the ranks of his newly replenished guardsmen, he'd chosen 2 on the basis of their riding ability and set out with 8 eel hounds between them. They'd been told as little as possible, but from his urgency it was easy to guess that their quest was important. They reached the mountains of Ba Sing Se in astonishing time, with barely a witness to mark their passing. Early on, one mount had broken its leg in a singing groundhog's hole and needed to be put down. Another died from exhaustion on the far shore of West Lake. But other than that, the constant, mindless riding, the wind in his hair, had been good for Zhang Shu's spirit. As much as he missed Heiran's company, he needed the occasional freedom from her watchful gaze. The party had brought more messenger hawks with their baggage, carefully caged and hooded. Zhang Shu had promised to send word to her as soon as possible. The location where he was set to meet the trackers was a small trailhead leading into the foothills of the southern Taihua Range. The gentle slope of grassy green knolls was punctured by rows of redstone crags jutting upward, uniformly following the same angle and grain. The rocks were as tall and numerous as the trees in a forest. Zhang Shu saw a lone figure in the middle of the stones, waving them over, and frowned. The message that had brought him here in such a hurry had explained, with overflowing apologies, that the Shirshu had followed the scent trail to those mountains, right before they'd lost control of the animal. It had escaped and run up the peaks in pursuit of its prey. For all he knew, it might have eaten the avatar. The handlers must have drawn lots to see which one would face his wrath in person while the rest looked for the Shirshu. He spurred his hound towards the unlucky representative. The man's waving was stiff and forced, like the motion of a water wheel. You can stop, Zhang Shu called out. I see you. A whistle, and then a thump. The lone tracker keeled over, 2 arrows in his back. Zhang Shu cursed and leapt off his mount, more arrows crossing the air above his saddle. He tented slabs of earth around him and hunkered down in his cover, listening to the thunks of projectiles landing around him. I am getting much too old for this. He never would have fallen for such an obvious trap in his younger days. There was a pause in the firing. He chambered his fist and punched outward. The slabs that had protected him now splintered and flew outward in all directions like shrapnel from a bombard. He heard screams from the rocks above. Taking in his surroundings as quickly as possible, he saw a few archers who'd fallen from their perches lying at the base of the crags. But better safe than sorry. He lowered his stance, shook his waist, and whirled his arms. From base to top, every stone he could see violently sprouted thin spikes the size of giants, like they'd instantly transformed into the same species of C1 cactus. He heard more screams from the archers who remained hidden in their cover behind the rocks. That should have been it for elevated opponents. Fighters who fancied themselves professionals but weren't often made the mistake of taking the high ground without planning a way out. His eel hound had run off, but two of them were still nearby, tethered by their reins to a heavy weight. The corpse of one of the guardsmen studded with arrows. The reins had snagged on his wrist. Good job, whatever your name was, Zhang Shu thought. The other guardsman was busy wiping the blood off his dao with a hunk of grass. 3 attackers lay at his feet. They charged him with melee weapons, and bizarre ones at that. Zhang Shu thought he spotted an abacus made of iron on the ground. He was still impressed. What do they call you, son? The guardsman snapped to attention and stared above Zhang Shu's head with youthful, bright eyes. He had the strong brow of Eastern Peninsular ancestry. Seifel, sir. It was likely Seifel didn't understand how close of a call this was. Talent would only let you survive so many encounters. After that, the odds tended to catch up with a vengeance. Excellent work, Seifel. There's always opportunity for a quick blade on my staff. I'll remember this. The young guardsman kept his thrill contained as best he could. Thank you, sir. Zhang Shu nudged a body onto its back. The dead man was clothed in the standard attire of bandit, in the sense that he wore whatever peasant clothing he'd taken with him from his last legitimate occupation. This one had the trousers of a sailor or sailmaker, mended repeatedly with fine sewing silk. But there was an odd detail on his shirt. He'd stuck a flower in his lapel. It was too ruined to see what kind. Zhang Shu checked another body. It had no decoration on its person, but he backtracked along the path the man had charged and found what he was looking for on the ground. A dried moon peach blossom. A badge, Zhang Shu thought with some vehemence. He straightened up and looked around. The mountains loomed nearby. They were said to be uninhabited, practically impassable. If these men weren't clothed for an expedition. With a sudden burst of energy, he slammed his palm against the ground. Tremors rang through the earth, spreading wide like ripples in a pond. Sir, are you searching for something underground? Saifu asked. Maybe, Zhang Shu said, his attention skimming over the grass. Though what I'm doing right now is preserving their footprints. He continued along the trail left by Saifu's opponents, watching the indentations they made with their heels and toes in the dirt, examining where they left mud on grass. A long time ago, he tracked criminals down in such a way by listening to the earth and reading its marks. The prints, in reverse, led to a clearing with a conspicuous grey rock the size of a chair. Zhang Shu waved it away with a brush of his hand. Underneath was a wooden trapdoor. A hidden passage? Seifel asked. Zhang Shu nodded grimly. Hidden passage. Through the mountains. Sir, is this town supposed to be here? Seifel said. No, Zhang Shu said, his teeth grinding together. Though he couldn't see underground, knowing the tunnel was there allowed Zhang Shu to make various educated guesses with earthbending and knowledge of stonework to determine a path. They'd followed the network up the mountain on their eel hounds, forcing aside blocked passages and relying on the agility of their unusual mounts to see them through. Eventually, the obstacles parted to reveal a great crater nestled in the heights, and in that bowl, waited for them, was a village that neither of them had ever heard of before. An entire settlement not on any map, out of reach of the law. Zhang Shu's rage was almost too great for him to swallow. He was a storekeeper who would never be rid of vermin, a servant who would never be able to polish the silver clean. The town appeared to be abandoned. They rode through empty streets, between long houses that made a mockery of the four nations with adornments either looted or crudely imitated from their places of origin. One particular scrap-quilted banner had been fastened together so that characters from multiple signs clumsily formed syllables Hu and Zhang. Hu Zhang. That was the name of this dung heap. There's our Sheshu, sir, Seifel said. He pointed down the street where a dark, foul-smelling mound blocked the way. The beast lay in relatively dignified repose. Other than the flies buzzing around its face, or lack thereof, it was still whole. Any trophy hunters would have found very quickly that toxins still coursed through its dead body. Professor Shaw would be upset, though. Zhang Shu would need to come up with a cover story and a convincing amount of hush money to keep the man's anger from casting suspicion. A brief scraping noise came from the house to his right. There was someone inside. Zhang Shu dismounted and approached the darkened building. "Sir?" Seifel whispered. "Going alone is a bad idea." Zhang Shu waved him off. "Patrol the street." He slipped inside, contouring against the doorframe rather than standing fully in the entrance, where he would be outlined by sunlight. Judging from the long tables and low backless stools, the building was some kind of inn or tavern. It made him furious again, that these outlaws had enjoyed enough peace in these mountains to build gathering places and sell each other wine. Zhang Shu walked around the tavern's counter. He found the person who'd made the noise. It was a man sitting on a pile of pillows. He was muscled and scarred like a fighter, though it would seem he'd fared poorly in his last outing. One of his legs was wrapped in cloth and splintered up to his hip. The injured man stared at Zhang Shu with the empty, weary expression of being caught out. Zhang Shu noticed empty bottles within his arm's reach, jars of half-eaten food. He pieced it together. The inhabitants of the settlement had evacuated some days ago, probably scared away by the Shirshu. The ambush at the base of the mountain had been a rearguard, or a bunch of greedy opportunists who'd lagged behind. This man with a broken leg couldn't make the journey down at all, so his companions had left him here to recover. Zhang Shu's eyes went to a small, out-of-place vase. It had a moon peach blossom in it. "I'm looking for a girl," he said to his recuperating friend. "She was here at some point, a very tall girl, taller than you or me. Pretty face, freckles, doesn't speak much. Have you seen her?" The man's eyebrows twitched. Could have been an attempt to conceal the truth, or it could have been his memory sparking but failing to light. She would have been accompanied by a firebender, another girl, black hair, military-bearing. Zhang Shu caught the spear hand's strike aimed at his throat and redirected it into the nearby shelf, smashing the uprights. The man could add a broken wrist to his troubles. Zhang Shu watched him seethe with pain. The injured fighter tucked his bad hand under his good arm. "I am Four Shadows Guan," he snarled with pride, "and I will tell you nothing. I know a man of the law when I see one." Zhang Shu believed him. Once these types told you their professional name, there was no more rational conversation to be had. He would try one more tactic, a play on the Dao Fei's emotions. He plucked the moon peach blossom from its vase and twirled the stem between his thumb and forefinger. "Times have changed," he said. "In my younger days, I remember tracking this small group around the edges of the desert, from watering hole to watering hole. The Band of the Scorpion, they called themselves. It couldn't have been more than a dozen members." Zhang Shu caught what he was looking for, the man snorting in derision at a brotherhood that small. Which meant his group was much larger. "The funny thing was, when I caught up with them, I found out why they were moving so slowly," he went on. "Two of their members had caught foot rot and couldn't walk. The others fashioned litters and carried them through the desert the whole time. The group would have escaped me if they had left their sick behind, but they chose to stay together. They chose brotherhood." He crushed the flower. "That's what followers of the code used to be like. When I look at you, abandoned by your sworn brothers, I don't see that tradition. I don't see honor." Zhang Shu let a flying gob of spit hit him in the face. "The brothers of the autumn bloom are willing to die for each other," the man said, wiping his lips. "You would never understand. Our cause makes us—" He paused, realizing that Zhang Shu was manipulating him. Four Shadows Guan was smarter than he looked. He clenched his jaw and slammed back against his makeshift bed rest. Zhang Shu grimaced and rolled up his sleeves. So much for doing this the easy way. He stepped into the sunlight and wiped his hands on a nearby sandal blanket that had been hung up to dry and forgotten. The autumn bloom, he thought to himself. The autumn bloom. Who in the name of Oma's bastard children were the autumn bloom? Zhang Shu really was getting too old. He'd never heard of this gang before. He, the man who once single-handedly kept half the continent from falling into lawlessness, had let a new criminal outfit large enough to populate a good-sized village operate within shouting distance of the capital. The autumn bloom, whoever they were and whatever their goals, had a level of organization high enough to evacuate the settlement the moment they suspected an intrusion. And more importantly, most importantly, the only thing that was important was that they now held the Avatar in their clutches. The girl had been here at some point, that was certain. She must have planned to hide in the remote mountains and fallen into an ambush like he nearly did. She'd been captured and taken to this headquarters. Shirshu followed living sense, and the animal would not have come here if she were dead. Zhang Shu cursed the spirits and mankind alike, cursed the threads of fates that had formed this knot. the avatar that had been kidnapped by Dao Fei. He threw his head back and stared at the sky for answers. Out of the corner of his eye, he watched the bird fly away, its long tail plumage trailing behind like a streamer. Some obscure creatures read the future through the patterns of winged creatures. Zhang Shu wondered if that would have worked, if birds could have found the girl at birth and saved them this trouble. He heaved a great sigh. Seifel rounded the corner and came back into the street, trotting back over to his boss. "Did you find anything inside, sir?" "Just a corpse." He looked at the young swordsman. Seifel, along with a handful of other men, had answered Zhang Shu's call for more fighters after the encounter with Tagaka left the ranks of his guard depleted, perhaps a little too quickly and conveniently now that he thought about it. "Seifel, I didn't tell you to send a message with one of our hawks," Zhang Shu said. The young man looked surprised. "I was relaying ahead for supplies," he said. His hand drifted toward his weapon. He was a capable warrior, unafraid to kill for pay, a mercenary who swore loyalty as long as the wages were good. When you got right down to it, there really was no difference between him and a Dao Fei. But lying was something he needed more practice at. "You're from the Eastern Peninsula, are you not?" Zhang Shu said. He clasped his hands behind his back. "I have a good friend who does a lot of business in the Eastern Peninsula. His name is who? Have you met him before by chance? Perhaps he was the one you relayed for supplies just now?" It had only been a twinge of suspicion on Zhang Shu's part, a bluff really, but mentioning whose name let loose a flood of tells from Seifel's face and body language. "Let me guess," Zhang Shu said, digging deeper along this productive seam of ore. "Who sent you to infiltrate my household, didn't he?" "With orders to find out what happened to the Avatar." The slight step backward Seifel took let Zhang Shu know that he'd struck upon the truth. "And being the smart young man you are, you realize the implication of the Shershu trail ending here. The Avatar, and let's be clear, we have been following the Avatar, has been lost to outlaws. That was the message you sent to Hugh just now." Seifel was astonished that Zhang Shu had performed the supernatural feat of reading his mind. Really, all Zhang Shu had done was follow lines of information as they unfolded, like any good Pai Sho player. The swordsman decided to follow a gambit of his own. He even found out, but they were in the isolated mountains and he had his weapon and his useful reflexes on his side. He warily drew his dao again. Zhang Shu rolled his neck, his joints creakier than in years past. The thing about Pai Sho was that most games didn't need to be played to completion. Masters usually recognized when they were beaten and resigned while the action was still technically in progress. If this dance between him and Hu had taken place on the grid, then right here would be where Zhang Shu was supposed to bow and pick up his tiles in defeat. There was no stopping the message from reaching Hu now that the bird was in the air. The Chamberlain would realize how big a mess he was hiding and assemble a case against him to the rest of the sages of the Earth Kingdom. If the girl was found alive and her identity proven, she'd be delivered straight into the hands of Hu. Who, in the end, wouldn't care which version of the Avatar he got, so long as he was taking it from Zhang Shu. By all logical reasoning, he was ruined. He'd lost. But what only his close Pai Sho partners knew about him was that Zhang Shu had never surrendered a game early in his life. On the rare occasions when an opponent got the best of him, he forced them to play out the lines to the bitter end. He made them jump hurdles for every piece of his they captured, and ran the late-night candles down to the last inches of wick out of sheer spite. Zhang Shu smiled grimly as he closed in on the young swordsman. Beating him always required a price in blood. He wasn't about to drop the habit now.